That night, blood dripped onto the marble floor of our $3 million mansion. Only I knew that when my stepmother struck me for the second time, this house became a crime scene. My father trembled, avoiding my bruises. While she screamed, I was ungrateful. But the real shock arrived the next morning when Grandpa walked in and asked a single question. Who logged into my bank account at 2 in the morning? My name is Quinn Marlowe, and as I stepped out of the black sedan onto the pavement in front of the Ridgeview County Courthouse, the first thing I felt was the phantom throb of my cheekbone. It was a dull, rhythmic ache that pulsed in time with the camera shutters clicking furiously behind the police barricades. I had spent 40 minutes that morning in front of my bathroom mirror, carefully layering color-correcting concealer over the purple and yellow bruise that bloomed across the left side of my face. To the world, my skin looked flawless, perhaps a little pale, but unbroken. To me, every smile I forced, every tightening of my jaw, was a reminder of the marble floor in the foyer of our $3 million mansion and the woman who had put me there. The morning air was crisp, biting through my blazer, but I did not shiver. I could not afford to shiver. Shivering looked like fear, and the sharks waiting on the courthouse steps fed on fear. There were dozens of them. Local news vans with their satellite dishes extended like antennae, independent vloggers holding stabilizers, and the usual vultures from the tabloids. They were here for the spectacle, the fall of the Marlowe dynasty. It was a delicious story for them. Arthur Marlowe, the banking titan, dead, leaving behind a messy war between his elegant, grieving daughter-in-law and his estranged, greedy granddaughter. That was the narrative she had sold them. That was the headline flashing across the bottom of the screens in the lobby. I kept my head high, my eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors of the entrance. I could hear them shouting my name. Quinn, is it true you coerced him? Quinn, surely you aren't going to evict your own father. Ms. Marlowe, look this way. I tightened my grip on my leather briefcase. Inside that case was not just legal paperwork. It was a timeline. It was a digital autopsy of greed. If they knew what I did for a living, really knew, they would not be asking if I coerced anyone. They would be asking why the opposition had been foolish enough to walk into a courtroom with me. I am not just an angry heir. I am a senior investigator for the North Sound Financial Crimes Bureau. My entire life is built on finding the truth buried in lines of code and bank ledgers. I hunt people who think they are smarter than the banking system. I pushed through the doors, the sudden silence of the atrium hitting me like a physical weight. My lawyer, Gabe, was waiting for me by the security checkpoint. He looked tired, his tie slightly askew, but his eyes were sharp. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded once. I am always ready. The courtroom was packed. It smelled of floor wax, old wood, and expensive cologne. I walked down the center aisle, feeling the eyes of the gallery boring into my back. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, keeping my posture rigid. Across the aisle, at the defense table, sat the performance of a lifetime. Victoria Hale Marlowe was dressed in black, of course, not the severe black of a mourning widow, but a soft, sympathetic charcoal that highlighted her fragile frame. She had a handkerchief clutched in one hand, dabbing at dry eyes. She looked like a saint who had been wronged by a cruel world. Sitting slightly behind her, hidden in her shadow like a punished child, was my father, Daniel Marlowe. He was staring at the grain of the wood table, refusing to lift his head. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched in that familiar defeatist slump. He knew the truth. He had been there. He had stood 5 feet away as his wife slammed my head into the wall, and he had done nothing. His silence today was just an echo of his silence that night. "All rise," the bailiff boomed. The Honorable Judge Vance swept in, his black robes billowing. He was a stern man with a reputation for hating theatrics, which gave me a sliver of hope. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the rim at the packed room. "We are here to hear opening arguments in the matter of the estate of Arthur Marlowe," he said, his voice dry and bored. Victoria's lawyer stood up, Colin Drake. He was the type of attorney you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth. He had a smile that did not reach his eyes and a suit that cost more than my first car. He buttoned his jacket, turned to the gallery, and began to weave his web. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice dripping with practiced sorrow. "This case is not about money. It is about family. It is about the tragic exploitation of a brilliant man in his final vulnerable days." I watched Victoria as he spoke. She lowered her head at the perfect moment, a single tear finally managing to escape. It was masterful. "Arthur Marlowe was a giant of industry," Drake continued, pacing in front of the judge's bench, but in his twilight years, he was confused, lonely, and who took advantage of that loneliness? Was it the daughter-in-law who cooked his meals, who managed his home, who ensured his comfort? No, it was his granddaughter, a young woman with a history of instability, a young woman who, feeling abandoned after her mother's passing, projected her anger onto her father's new family. I felt a muscle in my jaw twitch. Instability, that was their angle. Paint the investigator as the crazy one. Drake turned and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. Quinn Marlowe isolated her grandfather. She fed him lies about his son and daughter-in-law. She used her knowledge of technology to confuse him, to manipulate his digital life until he didn't know up from down. She coerced a dying man into signing a new will, cutting out the very people who cared for him, all to fund a lavish lifestyle she feels entitled to. The gallery murmured. I could hear the whispers, ungrateful, vicious. I did not react. I let the accusations wash over me. I was analyzing Drake's speech patterns, the way he emphasized specific emotional trigger words: lonely, confused, coerced. It was the standard fraudster playbook: appeal to emotion to distract from the lack of facts. Drake finished his opening with a dramatic flourish, resting his hand on Victoria's shaking shoulder. We asked the court to invalidate this fraudulent will and return the estate to its rightful heirs. He sat down. Victoria looked up at him with wide, grateful eyes. Judge Vance turned his gaze to my table. "Ms. Marlowe, your counsel may proceed." Gabe stood up, but before he could speak, the judge frowned. Looking down at the docket file in front of him, he flipped a page, then another. He paused, his brow furrowing. "Wait a moment," Judge Vance said, holding up a hand. The room went quiet. Even Drake looked confused. "I see here in the employment history section of the background brief." Judge Vance squinted at the paper. "Ms. Marlowe, you are currently employed by the state?" Gabe nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "In what capacity?" the judge asked, looking directly at me. I stood up slowly. My voice was steady, betraying none of the rage burning in my gut. "I am a senior forensic investigator for the North Sound Financial Crimes Bureau. Your Honor, I specialize in digital fraud, embezzlement, and elder financial abuse." The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a vacuum, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I saw Victoria's head snap up. Her weeping act faltered for a split second. Her eyes widened, darting from me to her lawyer. She knew I worked in finance. She knew I was good with numbers, but she had never bothered to ask exactly what my job title was. To her, I was just a boring number cruncher. She had no idea she was sitting across from a woman who put people like her in federal prison for a living. Judge Vance looked from me to Victoria, then back to me, one eyebrow raised slightly. "So, the court is to understand that the defense is accusing a state-certified financial crimes investigator of committing financial fraud?" Drake scrambled to his feet, his smooth demeanor cracking. "Your Honor, one's profession does not preclude them from personal misconduct. In fact, it makes her alleged manipulation even more dangerous. She has the skills to hide her tracks." Nice recovery, I thought, but the damage was done. The narrative of the unstable, confused girl had just taken a massive hit. You do not get my badge if you are unstable. Drake, sensing he was losing the momentum, decided to go for the throat. He decided to play the card they had been saving, the card they thought would bury me. "Your Honor, if I may." Drake interrupted, his voice rising. "We have proof of this misconduct. We have proof that Ms. Marlowe used those very skills to violate her grandfather's privacy before he even passed." The judge waved his hand. "Proceed." Drake turned to the gallery, making sure the reporters were listening. On the night of October 14th, just weeks before Arthur Marlowe suffered his stroke, there was a security breach in his personal banking accounts. Someone bypassed the two-factor authentication. Someone accessed his ledgers, his transfer history, and his estate planning documents. He paused for effect. The room leaned in. That access occurred at 2 a.m. It originated from the IP address of the family estate in Harbor Heights. At that hour, Arthur Marlowe was asleep. Daniel Marlowe was asleep. Victoria Marlowe was asleep. Drake turned his eyes on me, cold and triumphant. But Quinn Marlowe was awake. "We will show that she used a bypass key to log into her grandfather's accounts at 2 a.m. to alter records and set the stage for this fraudulent will. She is not an investigator, Your Honor. She is a hacker who robbed her own family in the dead of night." The gallery erupted. The reporters were frantically typing. 2 a.m, the granddaughter hacker. It was juicy. It was damning. Victoria buried her face in her hands, sobbing audibly now. My father looked sick, his face a pale shade of gray. I sat there, stone still. 2 a.m? The time echoed in my head. I remembered 2 a.m. I remembered the blue light of a laptop screen. I remembered the sound of footsteps on the plush carpet of the hallway. I remembered the feeling of bile rising in my throat as I watched the cursor move across the screen, transferring $5,000 to a shell company. Drake thought he had just dropped a bomb on me. He thought the 2 a.m. timestamp was his smoking gun. He had no idea. I looked down at my hands, resting calmly on the table. Under the table, my foot tapped a slow, steady rhythm. In my mind, I was not in the courtroom. I was back in the investigation room at the bureau. I was looking at the raw data packets I had intercepted weeks ago. I was looking at the device ID that had initiated that session. They were accusing me of the login. They were pinning the specific time on me because they knew I was the only other person in the house with the technical know-how. It was a smart play, a logical play. But it relied on one fatal assumption. They assumed I had not been watching the network traffic myself. I looked over at Victoria. She was peeking through her fingers, checking to see if the judge was buying it. Our eyes met. For a second, the mask slipped. I saw the smirk, the arrogance. She thought she had won. She thought she had twisted the knife perfectly. "See?" her eyes said. "You are the criminal now." I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I started to analyze her narrative in my head, breaking it down like I would a suspect's confession tape. The claim: I logged in at 2 a.m. The reality: someone logged in at 2 a.m. The twist: I printed the logs. I had them, in my bag. Tucked between the legal briefs was a thermal printout I had generated the morning after the attack. It detailed the MAC address of the device. It detailed the keystrokes. It detailed the user profile. I wanted to laugh. It was a cold, dark urge, but I suppressed it. They had just introduced the very evidence that would hang them, and they presented it as their weapon. Judge Vance hammered his gavel, silencing the murmurs. "Order. Order in this court," he commanded. He looked at Gabe. "Counselor, does your client deny accessing the accounts at the time specified?" Gabe stood up, cool as ice. "We reserve our right to present our timeline of events during the discovery phase, Your Honor. However, we vehemently deny any unauthorized or malicious activity by Ms. Marlowe." Drake scoffed loud enough for the mic to pick it up. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Drake, since you have raised the issue of electronic access, I am issuing an order effective immediately. I want a full forensic image of all devices that had access to Arthur Marlowe's accounts. That includes the devices of the plaintiff, the deceased, and the defendants." Victoria froze. The handkerchief stopped halfway to her face. "All devices?" Drake asked, his voice faltering slightly. "Your Honor, surely my client's personal phone and laptop are are relevant to the timeline you just established. Mr. Drake, the judge cut him off. You claim a login happened at 2 in the morning from the house. We need to rule out all devices to prove it was Ms. Marlowe, unless you have an objection to finding the truth. Drake looked at Victoria. She was pale. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. No objection, Your Honor, Drake said weakly. The judge nodded. Good. Discovery is to be exchanged within 48 hours. We reconvene on Thursday. The gavel banged, a sharp, final sound that echoed like a gunshot. The courtroom dissolved into chaos as people stood up to leave. The reporters were shouting questions again. I stood up slowly, smoothing my blazer. I turned to face the defense table. Victoria was gathering her purse. Her hands were shaking. This time, it wasn't an act. She looked at me, and for the first time since the trial began, there was genuine fear in her eyes. She had thought she was telling a story about a bad stepdaughter. She hadn't realized that in a financial crime investigation, stories don't matter, logs matter, timestamps matter, device IDs matter. She had just invited the court to look at the digital footprint of the house. She had just invited the judge to see exactly whose phone was active at 2 in the morning. I walked past their table on my way out. I paused just for a second, close enough that only she could hear me over the din of the crowd. My father looked up at me, his eyes pleading, terrified. I ignored him. My focus was on her. She clutched her designer bag to her chest like a shield. I gave her a small, cold smile, the kind of smile a predator gives when the trap snaps shut. In my head, I whispered the words that would define the rest of this war. They want to turn me into the defendant. They want to paint me as the villain. Fine, let them try. But by the time this week is over, this courtroom will remember who is actually sitting in the accused's chair. To understand why I walked into that courtroom with a briefcase full of digital forensics, you have to understand the house. You have to understand the $3 million mausoleum where my father decided to bury his grief and where Victoria decided to build her empire. 5 years ago, when I moved back to Harbor Heights, the house was brand new. It sat on a cliff overlooking the steel-gray waters of Lake Washington, a sprawling structure of glass, chrome, and imported Italian marble. It was the kind of house that appeared in architectural magazines, the kind that screamed success. But to me, it always felt like a showroom. It was cold, it was sterile, and as I would learn, it was always watching. I was 24 years old then, just out of graduate school and fresh into my probationary period at the North Sound Financial Crimes Bureau. My mother had passed away 2 years prior. A slow, agonizing exit that had hollowed my father out. When he met Victoria, he didn't just fall in love. He grabbed onto her like a drowning man grabbing a life raft. He married her within 6 months, sold our childhood home, and bought the mansion in Harbor Heights. He begged me to move in. He said he wanted the family together. He said the house was too big for just the two of them. I agreed, not because I wanted to live in a place that required a map to navigate, but because I worried about him. Daniel Marlowe was a good man, a soft man, but he was blind when it came to the people he loved. The first time I walked through the front door, I was struck by the silence. The foyer was cavernous, dominated by a sweeping staircase and that infamous marble floor, cream-colored with veins of gold. It was beautiful, objectively, but my investigator's brain didn't see a home. I saw the cameras. They were everywhere. Small, black domes nestled in the corners of the high ceilings. Motion sensors blinked red in the hallways. A smart home panel the size of an iPad was mounted by the door, controlling everything from the temperature of the wine cellar to the opacity of the bathroom windows. Victoria met me in the hallway. She was wearing white cashmere, smiling that tight, curated smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Welcome home, Quinn," she had said, offering a cheek for me to kiss. "I hope you don't mind, but we have gone fully digital, keyless entry, voice-activated lighting. It is safer this way." I didn't know then that safer was Victoria's code word for controlled. For the first few months, I tried. I really tried. I wanted my father to be happy. So I played the role of the supportive stepdaughter. I complimented her taste in abstract art. I ate the tiny, garnish-heavy portions of food she served at dinner. I bit my tongue when she redecorated my father's study, removing his comfortable, worn leather chair and replacing it with something stiff and modern that looked like a torture device. But the investigator in me could not turn off. My job was to look for anomalies, for things that did not fit the pattern, and Victoria did not fit. It started with the smart home system. One evening, I came home late from a case, exhausted and craving a hot shower. I typed my code into the front gate keypad. It buzzed red. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. Confused, I called my father. He didn't answer. I called Victoria. "Oh, Quinn," she said, her voice light and airy. "I updated the security protocols this afternoon. There have been some break-ins in the neighborhood. I didn't think you would be out this late." "I am 24, Victoria," I said, standing in the rain. "I work late." "I will buzz you in," she replied, ignoring my tone. "But we really should coordinate schedules. It saves electricity if the house knows when to shut down for the night." It wasn't about electricity, it was about knowing. From that day on, I noticed the pattern. If I left a light on in my room, I would receive a notification on my phone that the admin had turned it off remotely. If I brought a friend over, the cameras at the gate would log their license plate, and Victoria would casually mention at dinner that she saw I had company. It wasn't the heavy-handed abuse of a fairy tale villain. It was the suffocating, bureaucratic control of a prison warden. My father, of course, saw none of it. "She is just anxious." Quinn, he told me one night when I found him in the garage, hiding from the sterile perfection of the living room to smoke a cigar. "This house, the mortgage, it is a lot. She is just trying to manage everything." Manage, that was the word. Victoria managed us. But the real friction wasn't about lights or gate codes. It was about Grandpa Arthur. Arthur Marlowe lived in a modest craftsman house in the city, a place filled with books and dust and memories. He had stepped down as chairman of the bank years ago, but everyone knew he still held the controlling shares. He was the sun around which our family's financial universe orbited. To me, he was just Grandpa. To Victoria, he was a vault that refused to open. I remember a dinner about 6 months after I moved in. We were sitting at the long glass table, the city lights of Seattle twinkling in the distance through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victoria was pouring wine, an expensive vintage that I knew my father couldn't really afford. "Arthur is looking frail," Victoria said, swirling her glass. "I visited him today. That house is full of stairs. It is dangerous." "He likes his house," I said, cutting into my steak. "He built it." "He is sitting on a fortune and living like a pauper," she snapped, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "It is irresponsible. If he sold that place and liquidated some of those stagnant assets, he could move into a facility, or he could invest in Daniel's business." My father looked down at his plate. His business, a boutique consultancy firm, had been struggling for years. "Dad is doing fine," I lied. Victoria let out a short, sharp laugh. "Fine? Quinn, darling, you look at spreadsheets all day. You of all people should know the difference between fine and solvent." I put my fork down. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, leaning forward, her eyes hard and bright like diamonds, "that this family has a standard to maintain. Arthur is holding on to capital that could secure our future, but he is stubborn. He treats that bank stock like a family heirloom instead of a financial instrument. It is his money." "Victoria," I said quietly. "For now," she murmured, taking a sip of wine. That was the moment the air in the room changed. It wasn't just an awkward family dinner anymore. It was a declaration of intent. Later that night, as I was clearing the table, I heard them arguing in the library. The acoustics in the mansion were terrible. The hard surfaces carried sound like water. "I need 5,000. Daniel," Victoria was hissing. "The credit card company is calling 3 times a day." "I don't have it. Vic," my father pleaded. "I can't ask Dad again. He asked me last week why we needed so much cash flow if the house was an asset. He is so selfish, she cried out. He is sitting on millions. Daniel, millions. And he watches his son drown? He is not watching me drown. We are living in a $3 million house. We are the ones who overextended. There was a crash, like a vase shattering, then silence. I stood in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to walk in there. I wanted to confront her. But I knew, with the instinct of someone who hunts fraudsters, that I didn't have enough yet. I had anger. I had suspicion. I didn't have data. So I started watching. I noticed the mail, the statements from high-risk investment firms that Victoria would snatch off the counter before my father could see them. I noticed the way she talked about opportunities that sounded remarkably like Ponzi schemes. And I noticed the way she looked at the smart home logs. She wasn't just checking to see when I came home. She was checking to see when Grandpa Arthur visited. One specific night stands out in my memory. It was the first time the timestamp 2 a.m. burned itself into my brain. It was a Tuesday in November. I had woken up thirsty. I padded out of my bedroom, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet of the upstairs landing. The house was dark, a tomb of shadows and glass. As I passed the open atrium that looked down into the living room and office area, I saw a light. It was faint, a ghostly blue glow reflecting off the giant mirror that hung in the hallway below. I froze. My father was a heavy sleeper. He snored with the rhythm of a freight train. He wouldn't be up. I crept closer to the railing and peered over. The door to the home office was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see the reflection in the hallway mirror. It was Victoria. She wasn't wearing her usual silk sleeping robe. She was dressed in black yoga pants and a hoodie, sitting hunched over the desk. She was typing, not the casual tapping of someone browsing social media, but the rapid, rhythmic typing of someone entering data. I squinted, trying to see the screen, but the angle was wrong. Then, she stopped. She picked up her phone. I saw her dial a number. 2 a.m. Who calls someone at 2 a.m? I strained my ears. Yes, she whispered. Her voice carried up the cavernous stairwell. I am in. The security question was the name of the first pet. Buster. I told you it would be easy. Pause. No. The notification goes to his landline. He is deaf in one ear. He won't hear it ring downstairs. We have a window of about 10 minutes before the system resets. Pause. Just move the smaller amount first. If it flags, we claim it was a glitch. My blood ran cold. This wasn't credit card debt. This wasn't an argument about spending. This was theft. I stepped back, my foot landing on a loose floorboard. Creak. The typing stopped instantly. Down below, the office light vanished. The laptop had been slammed shut. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall. I heard the office door open. I heard footsteps moving to the bottom of the stairs. Who is there? Victoria's voice called out. It wasn't fearful. It was sharp, accusatory. I didn't answer. I waited until I heard her move towards the kitchen, checking the back door, before I slipped back into my room. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart racing so fast I thought it would bruise my ribs. She was hacking someone. Buster? That was Grandpa Arthur's dog, the golden retriever he had when I was 6. She was accessing Grandpa's accounts. The next morning, at breakfast, Victoria was her usual pristine self. She was slicing a grapefruit with surgical precision. Did you sleep well? Quinn? She asked, not looking up. Fine, I said, pouring coffee. My hand shook slightly. I thought I heard you up last night, she said, around 2. I got some water. I said, you should be careful, she said, finally lifting her eyes to meet mine. Her pupils were small, hard points. The motion sensors are sensitive. I get an alert on my phone every time there is movement. It wakes me up. It is very disrupting. It was a threat. She was telling me she knew. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the desperation underneath the cashmere. She was a woman drowning in debt, living in a glass box she couldn't afford, staring at a fortune she couldn't touch, and she had decided to stop asking for permission. I didn't say anything. I finished my coffee, went to my room, and wrote down everything I had heard: the time, the date, the name Buster, the mention of the landline. I didn't confront her, not yet. I was 24, and I was scared, but I was also a Marlowe. And more importantly, I was an investigator. You don't accuse a suspect when you have a hunch. You accuse them when you have the logs. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my room, looking out at the lights of Seattle shimmering across the black water. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I thought about Grandpa Arthur, sitting in his dusty house, trusting his family, trusting his son. I thought about my father, asleep in the next room, oblivious to the predator lying next to him. I gripped the railing until my knuckles turned white. "You can have the smart lights. Victoria," I whispered to the cold wind, "you can have the gate codes. You can have this $3 million cage, but you are not taking him." I made a vow then. Standing in the dark, I would not let her turn my grandfather into a cash machine. I would watch her. I would record her. And when she made a mistake, because greedy people always make a mistake, I would be there to catch it. I just didn't know then that it would take 5 years, a quart of my own blood, and a public trial to finally close the trap. I didn't know that the very cameras she installed to control me would be the ones to hang her. But I was learning, and the lesson started that night, at 2 a.m. The dinner began like any other Tuesday in the Marlowe household, with the clinking of silver against china and the oppressive weight of unsaid words hanging over the roast duck. This was 3 months before the trial, before the cameras, before the world knew my name. At the time, I was just Quinn, the daughter who asked too many questions, sitting across from the woman who was slowly bleeding my family dry. I had spent the afternoon at the bureau running a trace. It was unofficial. Of course, I had used my own laptop and public Wi-Fi to avoid flagging internal compliance, but the results were irrefutable. I had printed them out on a crisp, white sheet of paper. Now, that paper sat in my lap, burning a hole through my napkin. My father, Daniel, was talking about his golf game, trying desperately to fill the silence. He looked tired. His skin was gray, and there were new lines etched around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting debt. Victoria sat next to him, radiant in a silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. She was nodding at his stories, but her eyes were on her phone, scrolling through Zillow listings for vacation homes in Aspen. I waited for a lull in the conversation. When my father paused to take a sip of wine, I reached under the table, pulled out the document, and slid it across the glass surface. It stopped right in front of Victoria's water glass. "What is this?" she asked, not touching it. "It is a bank log," I said, my voice steady. "From Grandpa Arthur's primary checking account." My father froze, his wineglass hovering halfway to his mouth. "Quinn, we don't discuss money at the table. We need to discuss this." "Dad," I said, keeping my eyes on Victoria, "look at the highlighted rows. Specifically, the timestamps." Victoria picked up the paper with 2 fingers, as if it were soiled. She glanced at it, then let out a short, dismissive laugh. She tossed it back onto the table. "I don't know what you think you are reading, Quinn, but these are just numbers." "They are login records," I corrected her. "Successful logins. They show access to the transfer portal, and they all happened at 2 a.m. I pointed to the column on the right. "And here is the interesting part. The IP address originates from this house, from the router in the library." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the smart fridge in the kitchen. My father frowned, putting his glass down. 2 a.m? That must be a mistake. Dad is asleep at 2. We are all asleep. "Exactly," I said. "So why is someone in this house moving money out of his account while we are sleeping?" Victoria's face hardened. The mask of the bored housewife vanished, replaced by something sharp and reptilian. She turned to my father, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "Daniel, she is doing it again. She is obsessing. It is obviously a technical glitch, a server delay. Or maybe Arthur forgot to log out during the day and the system refreshed at night. It is not a refresh. Victoria, I snapped. It is a new session, and it is followed immediately by transfers to a Shell LLC in Nevada. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. The silverware jumped. Enough, she shouted. She stood up, looming over the table. I am sick of this. Quinn, I am sick of you treating me like a criminal in my own home. You are a paranoid, ungrateful brat. I stood up too. I am trying to protect him. You are trying to control him, she screamed back. You are jealous because Arthur trusts me. You are jealous because Daniel loves me. You want to drive a wedge between us so you can hoard the inheritance for yourself. You are the greedy one. Quinn, you are the one stalking an old man's bank account. My father looked between us, helpless. Quinn, please, Victoria is right. It is probably just a glitch. Don't upset her. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a man who had been hollowed out. He didn't want the truth. He wanted peace, even if that peace cost him his father's fortune. Just then, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. It is the office. I have to take this. Dad, sit down, I said. I have to take this, he repeated, pushing his chair back. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He grabbed his phone and hurried out to the patio. Sliding the glass door shut behind him, he was fleeing. He was leaving me alone with the shark. I gathered the papers. I knew the conversation was over. I turned to leave, heading for the hallway that led to the home office and the side exit. I just wanted to get out of there. I was halfway down the corridor when I heard the click of her heels on the marble. Fast, aggressive. Quinn. I didn't stop. I said, "Stop walking away from me." I felt a hand grab my arm and spin me around. I was 30 years old. I was a trained federal investigator, but in that moment, the force of the motion sent me stumbling back. Victoria was standing there, her chest heaving. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure rage. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed, stepping into my personal space, bringing that trash to my dinner table. I pulled my arm free. I am someone who can read a ledger. Victoria, I know what you are doing. You know nothing, she spat. You are a sad, lonely little girl who thinks a badge makes her special. You think you can intimidate me? I am not trying to intimidate you. I am building a case. That was the wrong thing to say. Her hand moved so fast I didn't see it coming. It wasn't a theatrical slap from a soap opera. It was a hard, open-handed strike that connected solidly with my cheekbone. The sound was sickeningly loud in the quiet hallway. Crack! My head snapped to the right. I lost my balance, my heels slipping on the polished stone. I fell backward, my shoulder crashing into the sharp edge of the console table. A heavy crystal vase wobbled and fell, shattering on the floor. Pain exploded in my shoulder, hot and jagged. I gasped, sliding down to the floor, clutching my arm. Above me, a tiny red light on the wall blinked once. The smart home vibration sensor. It had registered the impact. A silent witness. I looked up at her, stunned. My cheek was throbbing, heat radiating from the skin. You just hit me. Victoria didn't back down. She stepped over the broken glass, grabbed the lapel of my blazer, and hauled me up to a sitting position. She shook me, her nails digging into my skin through the fabric. You listen to me, you little spy, she growled, her face inches from mine. You can go to your precious police. You can show them your little papers. But if you do, Daniel will never forgive you. You will destroy this family, and I will make sure you never set foot in this house again. You will be homeless. You will be nothing. She punched me then, a short, stiff jab to the same shoulder I had just smashed against the table. It wasn't a blow meant to knock me out. It was a blow meant to dominate, to hurt. Do you hear me? She screamed, shaking me again. Suddenly, the patio door slid open down the hall. What is going on? My father's voice echoed off the walls. Victoria released me instantly. She took a step back, her hands flying to her mouth. Oh my God, Daniel, she cried, her voice instantly shifting into a high, hysterical pitch. She slipped. I tried to catch her, but she was screaming at me and she threw herself at the wall. I sat there on the floor, clutching my throbbing shoulder, tasting copper in my mouth. My lip was split. I looked at my father. He was standing at the end of the hall, staring at the shattered vase and his wife's trembling form. She threatened me. "Daniel!" Victoria sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She said she was going to ruin us. I was so scared. "Dad," I croaked. "She hit me. Look at my face." My father looked at the red mark blooming on my cheek. Then he looked at Victoria's tears. He looked at the broken glass. He closed his eyes and let out a long, weary sigh. "Quinn, please," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just stop, both of you. Just stop fighting." He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't help me up. He just wanted the noise to stop. That was the moment the last thread of loyalty snapped. I pulled myself up using the wall for support. My shoulder felt like it was on fire. I looked at Victoria, who was now burying her face in my father's chest, and then I looked at him, patting her hair. "I am leaving," I said. My voice was cold, detached. I walked past them. I didn't run. I walked to the front door, grabbed my purse, and stepped out into the cool night air. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could unlock my car. As I sat in the driver's seat, checking my reflection in the rearview mirror, the swelling lip, the angry red welt on my cheek, I realized I was still clutching the papers. I had grabbed them from the floor when I fell. The log of the logins, the 2 a.m. evidence. I drove to a motel on the other side of town. I didn't sleep. I sat on the bed, holding an ice pack to my face, staring at the timestamps on the paper until they blurred together. The next morning, I went back. I didn't go back to apologize. I went back because I knew Grandpa Arthur was coming for his weekly brunch, and I knew I couldn't leave him alone with them. When I pulled into the driveway, Arthur's vintage Buick was already there. I parked and walked in. The house was quiet. The shattered vase had been cleaned up, but the console table was slightly askew. They were in the living room. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a beautiful, golden morning, completely at odds with the violence of the night before. Victoria was sitting on the white sofa, looking pale and fragile. My father was standing by the fireplace, nursing a cup of coffee, and there, in the center of the room, stood Arthur. He was leaning heavily on his cane, his knuckles white against the wood. He was wearing his old tweed suit, the one that smelled of pipe tobacco and peppermint. He looked frail, his back slightly bent, but his eyes, those sharp gray banker's eyes, were clear. When I walked in, everyone froze. Victoria's eyes darted to the bruise on my cheek, which I hadn't bothered to cover with makeup yet. Arthur turned slowly to look at me. He took in the swollen lip. He took in the stiffness of my shoulder. Then he turned back to Victoria and Daniel. "The maid tells me there was a disturbance last night," Arthur said. His voice was low, gravelly. "She says there was screaming, broken glass." Victoria started to sniffle. "Oh, Arthur, it was terrible. She was very emotional. We tried to calm her down, but..." Arthur raised his hand. One finger. Silence. He looked at Daniel. "Is that what happened, son? Quinn was emotional?" Daniel looked at his shoes. "Dad, it is complicated. Everyone was tired. It was a misunderstanding." Arthur didn't blink. He turned his gaze to the massive abstract painting hanging over the fireplace, then to the smart home panel on the wall, and finally, he looked straight at Victoria. "I didn't sleep well last night either," Arthur said. "I was up late, thinking, looking at my own records." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He took a step forward, the tap of his cane echoing on the marble floor. He looked from Victoria to Daniel, and then he asked the question that would cut through 5 years of lies. "Tell me," he said, enunciating every word, "last night, at 2 a.m, who logged into my bank account from the IP address of this house?" Victoria stopped sniffling. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. Daniel looked up, his face pale. "Dad, what?" "I asked a question," Arthur said, his voice rising just a fraction. "At 2 a.m, while my son was asleep, while my granddaughter was allegedly throwing a tantrum, someone in this house used my security answers to access my ledger. Who was it?" Victoria shifted in her seat. "Arthur, really, your memory isn't what it used to be. Maybe you are confused about the time. Or maybe Quinn." "Don't," Arthur snapped. He didn't shout, but the command cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare say her name right now." He stood there for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. He was giving them a chance to confess. He was giving his son a chance to be a man. Daniel said nothing. Victoria stared at the carpet. Arthur nodded slowly, as if confirming a sad hypothesis he had held for a long time. "I see," he said softly. He turned around and began to walk toward the front door. He moved slowly, each step a labor. As he passed where I was standing in the archway, he stopped. He looked at my face again. He looked at the bruise Victoria had put there. His eyes softened, filled with a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. He reached out and touched my arm, right above where she had punched me. He didn't say he believed me. He didn't scream at them. He just reached into the pocket of his tweed jacket. He pulled out a small, silver USB drive. He pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers over it with his cold, dry hand. "If they want a war, Quinn," he whispered, so low that only I could hear him, "then you play by your own rules, not theirs." He gave my hand a squeeze, a transfer of strength from one generation to the next. Then he let go, straightened his back, and walked out the front door without looking back at the son who had failed him or the woman who was robbing him. I stood there, clutching the cold metal of the USB drive, watching his car drive away. Behind me, Victoria was already whispering frantically to Daniel, spinning a new web of lies. But it didn't matter anymore. I had the logs, I had the bruise, and now I had the weapon my grandfather had smuggled out of his own life. The game had just changed. 3 weeks after the night of the bruise and the USB drive, the call came. It was not my father who called me. It was not Victoria. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Ortega, her voice trembling so hard I could barely understand her through the static of the line. Arthur had collapsed in his kitchen. The paramedics were already there. I drove to the hospital with a kind of numbness spreading through my chest, a cold armor I had constructed to keep the panic at bay. When I arrived at the emergency room entrance, I saw them. Victoria was already performing. She was clinging to the arm of a paramedic, weeping dramatically, her makeup perfectly smudged to convey distress without looking messy. My father stood behind her, looking lost, like a child who had been separated from his parents in a supermarket. When I tried to follow the gurney into the triage unit, Victoria stepped in front of me. Her tears vanished instantly, replaced by a look of steel. "Family only. Quinn," she whispered, her voice low enough that the nurses nearby could not hear the venom. "I am family," I said, stepping around her. She grabbed my arm, the same arm she had bruised weeks ago. "You upset him enough the last time you saw him. Do you want to kill him? Let Daniel and me handle this. We are his medical proxies." I looked at my father, waiting for him to step in, waiting for him to say, "She is his granddaughter. Let her pass." But he just looked at the floor, studying the scuff marks on the linoleum. He was already choosing his side, even if he didn't know it yet. I was forced to wait in the plastic chairs of the lobby for 6 hours, while Victoria gave updates to the doctors and held court with the few family friends who trickled in. I sat alone in the corner with my laptop bag pressed against my chest. Inside that bag was the USB drive Arthur had given me. I had finally opened it the night before. It was not just a log of bank transfers, it was an autopsy of betrayal. Arthur had been scanning documents for 2 years. There were handwritten notes in his shaky script, analyzing credit card statements. There were emails he had printed out where Victoria had impersonated my father to authorize withdrawals. But the most damning file was a digital voice memo recorded just 2 months prior. In it, Arthur's voice sounded tired, but clear. "I am recording this because I do not think I can trust my own house anymore." The recording said, "Victoria asked me today about the deed to the lake house. She asked if I had updated my will, when I told her I was leaving everything as it was. She looked at me with eyes I did not recognize. I fear for Daniel. He is a good man, but he is weak, and she is hungry." I sat in that hospital waiting room, listening to my grandfather's voice through my earbuds, watching the woman he was afraid of pretending to pray for his recovery. It took every ounce of my professional restraint not to walk over there and play the recording for the entire room. Arthur stabilized 2 days later. The stroke had been mild, a warning shot rather than a fatal blow, but it had taken something from him. When I was finally allowed to see him, only because the doctors insisted on immediate family visitors, he looked smaller. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a fragile old man in a hospital gown that was too big for his shoulders. Victoria tried to stay in the room, hovering by the bedside like a vulture waiting to feed, but Arthur waved her away. "Leave us," he rasped. She hesitated, looking at the heart monitor. "Arthur, you need rest. Quinn will just agitate you." "Out," he said. It wasn't a shout, but the command was absolute. When the door clicked shut, the silence that filled the room was heavy. I pulled a chair close to the bed and took his hand. It felt like dry parchment paper. "I saw the files. Grandpa," I whispered. "The USB. I know everything." He squeezed my hand weakly. His eyes, usually so sharp, were cloudy. "Don't use them yet," he murmured. "Not while I'm here." "Why? They are stealing from you." "Because," he said, taking a shallow breath, "if you expose them now, they will say I am senile. They will say you manipulated the data. You need to wait until there is no doubt." He turned his head to look at me, and for a moment, the fog cleared. "Quinn, listen to me. Do not let them define you by the money they want to take. They think value is a number in a ledger. They think a house is a legacy." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that scared me. "I made changes," he said. "The lawyer has them." "What changes?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. He just closed his eyes. "If they want a war, let them fire the first shot. But remember, the truth is the only asset that doesn't depreciate." He died 4 days later. The funeral was a grotesque pageant. It was held at the largest cathedral in Seattle, a venue chosen by Victoria. Of course, she wore a black veil and stood at the front of the receiving line, accepting condolences with the grace of a widowed queen. The local press was there, snapping photos of the grieving Marlowe dynasty. I stood in the back. I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. Not here. Not while surrounded by people who were already calculating how to carve up his life's work. I felt like a spy in enemy territory. The next morning, the reading of the will took place at the offices of Henderson and Clark. The mahogany conference table was long enough to land a plane on. Victoria sat at the head, next to my father. She had already started talking about renovations she planned to make to the Harbor Heights mansion, assuming that with Arthur gone, the title would naturally flow to Daniel, and thus to her. Mr. Henderson, Arthur's attorney for 40 years, walked in carrying a thick leather binder. He didn't look at anyone. He sat down, adjusted his spectacles, and opened the file. He read through the standard bequests first: charitable donations to the library, the hospital, the university. Victoria tapped her manicured fingernails on the table, impatient. Then came the assets. To my son, Daniel Marlowe, I leave the sum of $250,000 to be paid in monthly installments over a period of 10 years. The tapping stopped. 250? Daniel repeated, his voice cracking. That is it? But the business debts alone are double that. Mr. Henderson continued, his voice devoid of emotion. To my daughter-in-law, Victoria Hale Marlowe, I leave nothing. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Victoria sat perfectly still, her face frozen in a mask of shock. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. And finally, Mr. Henderson read the last clause. To my granddaughter, Quinn Marlowe, whom I trust to preserve the integrity of this family, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my entire portfolio of stocks, my personal savings, and the property located at 442 Skyline Drive, Harbor Heights, the $3 million mansion. He left me the house. I sat back in my chair. The air knocked out of me. I had expected him to protect his money. I had expected him to set up a trust. I had not expected him to hand me the keys to the very cage I'd been trying to escape. He had given me the weapon Victoria wanted most. That cannot be right, Victoria whispered. Her voice was shaking, but not with sadness, with rage. It is the final will and testament, executed 2 weeks before his passing, Mr. Henderson said, closing the binder. She coerced him, Victoria shrieked, standing up so abruptly her heavy chair tipped over backward with a deafening crash. She stared at me, her eyes wild. You did this. You went to the hospital and you forced him to sign this. Victoria, please, my father stammered, reaching for her. Don't touch me, she screamed, slapping his hand away. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You think you have won? You think you can walk away with my house? I will bury you. Quinn, I will drag your name through the mud until you beg me to take it back. She stormed out of the room, my father trailing after her like a beaten dog. I stayed seated, staring at the leather binder. I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a target. The war started exactly 24 hours later. I was at my desk at the North Sound Financial Crimes Bureau, reviewing a case on credit card skimming, when the news alert popped up on my monitor. Investigator accused of elder abuse in Marlowe estate battle. I clicked the link, my hand trembling. It was a story in a local tabloid, but it was spreading fast. The article claimed that I, a trained financial investigator, had used undue influence and psychological manipulation to force a dying man to change his will. But it was the photo that stopped my heart. It was a picture of me leaving the courthouse the previous week, the day of the initial hearing. The lighting was harsh. The bruise on my cheek, the one Victoria had given me, was visible despite the makeup, but the caption didn't say I was a victim. Quinn Marlowe, pictured here with injuries she claimed were from a fall, is alleged to have a history of unstable behavior and violent outbursts. They were using my injury against me. They were painting me as the aggressor. My office phone rang. It was the director of the bureau. Marlowe, my office, now. The walk to the director's office felt like a march to the gallows. My colleagues, people I had worked with for years, looked away as I passed. The news was already circulating. The director didn't ask me to sit down. We have received a formal complaint, he said, sliding a folder across his desk. It alleges that you used bureau resources to access your grandfather's private financial records prior to his death. That is a lie, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my ears. We have to investigate. Quinn, you know the protocol. Until Internal Affairs clears you, you are on administrative leave. Badge and gun on the desk. I stared at him. Sir, I am the one who investigates fraud. I am being framed. Then prove it, he said, but do it from outside this building. I walked out of the bureau carrying a cardboard box with my personal effects. It was raining. Of course it was raining. I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched the rain streak down the windshield, feeling the walls closing in. I had lost my grandfather. I had lost my reputation. And now, I had lost my job. My phone buzzed. It was my father. For a second, a foolish, childish hope flared in my chest. Maybe he was calling to check on me. Maybe he had seen the news and realized how far Victoria had gone. I answered, Dad? Quinn, he sounded exhausted. Look, I just saw the news. This is getting out of hand. She is lying. Dad, you know she is lying. You were there when she hit me. I know, he said quickly. dismissing the violence that had marked my face. But Quinn, you have to understand her position. She is scared. That house. It is everything to her. What about what is right? Dad? What about what Grandpa wanted? He sighed, a long, defeated sound. Honey, listen, if you renounce the claim to the house, just give her the house. We can stop the lawsuit. I can talk to the bureau director. We can make this all go away. I gripped the phone so tight I thought the screen would crack. You want me to pay her off? I asked, my voice quiet. You want me to give her the $3 million asset she tried to steal, just so you can have a quiet life? I am stuck in the middle here. Quinn, he pleaded, I am trying to keep this family together. No, Dad, I said, tears finally stinging my eyes. You are not stuck in the middle. You are standing right next to her. I hung up. I drove to Harbor Heights. I didn't go in. I just parked across the street from the mansion. It loomed against the gray sky, a massive structure of glass and stone. I saw the lights on in the living room. I imagined Victoria in there, probably on the phone with her PR team, spinning the next web of lies. I looked at the house that was legally mine. I hated it. I hated every inch of marble, every smart home sensor, every cold, expensive room. But as I sat there, watching the rain hit the pavement, I realized something. My father wanted me to give it up for peace. Victoria wanted me to give it up out of fear. If I walked away now, I would get my job back. I would get my anonymity back. But Arthur would be remembered as the senile old man who was tricked, and Victoria would win. I touched the empty space on my belt where my badge used to be. I touched the USB drive in my pocket. I am not keeping this house because I want to live in it, I whispered to the empty car. I am keeping it because it is the crime scene. I put the car in gear and drove away. I was done being the victim. I was done being the daughter. It was time to be what I was born to be. An investigator. They took my badge. They took my gun. They took my office with the view of the Seattle skyline. But they could not take the 10 years of pattern recognition hardwired into my brain. I sat in the cramped living room of the rental apartment I had moved into after leaving the motel, surrounded by a chaotic sea of paper. The silver USB drive my grandfather had pressed into my hand was plugged into my personal laptop, glowing with a steady, rhythmic blue light. It was the only clean thing in the room. I had to be careful. I knew the bureau was watching me, waiting for me to log into a restricted database or run a background check using official channels. If I did that, I would go to jail, and Victoria would win. So I did not break the law. I did not hack. I simply read. I read what Arthur had legally given me. The USB drive was a tomb of evidence. It contained 3 years of bank statements, scanned handwritten journals, and downloaded audio files from his customer service calls. It was a messy, disjointed collection of data, the kind an old man compiles when he knows something is wrong but cannot quite find the words to say it. I started with the money. I built a master spreadsheet, manually entering every single transaction over $500 from the last 36 months. It took me 3 days of coffee-fueled isolation. My eyes burned, but as the rouse filled up, a picture began to emerge. It was a picture of a slow, systematic bleed. There were the obvious ones. Transfers labeled Loan, Daniel Medical, or Victoria Investment Opportunity. These were always for round numbers: $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. They always occurred on a Friday. I pulled up a calendar and cross-referenced the dates. Every single Friday that a transfer was made coincided with a charity gala or a weekend retreat that Victoria had attended in the city. I remembered those weekends. She would leave the mansion in Harbor Heights dressed in silk and diamonds, telling my father she was networking for his business. I went deeper. I dug into the public records of the venues she claimed to visit. I checked the dates of the galas. They did not match. On the weekend of November 12th, when $15,000 left Arthur's account for a medical emergency, there was no gala. There was, however, a high-stakes poker tournament at the Sovereign Hotel Casino. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just greed, it was debt. Daniel was gambling. He was losing. And Victoria was the one cleaning up the mess, using Arthur's money to plug the holes before the ship sank. She wasn't just stealing for luxury, she was stealing to keep the illusion of their life afloat. But the transfers were authorized. That was the problem. On paper, it looked like Arthur had signed off on them. Then I looked at the metadata. I focused on the 2 in the morning logins. There were dozens of them over the last year. Each one followed the same pattern. A login at 2 or 3 in the morning, a transfer initiated, a log out 5 minutes later. I pulled the IP logs from the bank statements Arthur had downloaded. The bank recorded the IP address of every session for security. I opened a free public geolocation tool on my browser. I typed in the IP address that appeared over and over again in the midnight logs. The map pinned the location. It wasn't Arthur's small house in the city. It wasn't a hacker in Russia. It was 442 Skyline Drive, the mansion. I sat back in my chair, staring at the blinking cursor. The logins were coming from the house modem. That meant physically. The device had to be connected to our Wi-Fi. It proved that whoever was moving the money was inside the mansion while Arthur was miles away, asleep in his own bed. But proof of location wasn't proof of identity. Victoria's lawyer would argue that Arthur could have been visiting. They would argue he gave them permission. I needed something that proved deception. I opened the folder labeled Audio. Arthur was meticulous. He recorded his calls with the bank because his hearing was failing and he wanted to listen back to instructions. Most of the files were mundane, discussions about interest rates, questions about branch hours. Then I found a file dated 6 months ago. The file name was simply suspicious. I put my headphones on and pressed play. The recording started with the hold music. Then, a bank representative came on the line. Pacific Regional Bank. This is Sarah. How can I help you? Then, a voice answered. It was a female voice. Smooth, professional. Hi, Sarah. This is Quinn Marlowe. I am calling on behalf of my grandfather, Arthur Marlowe. He is having trouble with his password. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I need to reset the security questions, the voice continued. He is getting older and keeps forgetting the answers. Of course, Miss Marlowe, the teller said. I see you are listed as a beneficiary, but I need to verify identity. Can you confirm your date of birth? The woman on the recording recited my birthday. She recited my social security number. Thank you, the teller said. And just for our security, you are his only granddaughter, correct? Yes, the voice said. My sister is out of the country, so I am handling everything. I hit pause. The silence in my apartment was deafening. My sister. I am an only child. I have always been an only child. The woman on the tape had slipped up, in her haste to sound authoritative, to create a narrative of a caring family member taking charge. She had invented a sister to explain why she was calling instead of someone else. But it wasn't the lie that made my blood boil. It was the voice. I knew that voice. I had heard it scream at me in the hallway. I had heard it whisper lies to my father. It was Victoria. She was impersonating me. She was using my identity to crack open my grandfather's vault. I grabbed my phone and dialed Elias Monroe. Elias was an audio forensics expert I had worked with on a wiretap case 2 years ago. He was the best in the business, and more importantly, he hated bullies. Elias, I said when he picked up, I need a favor, a big one. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Elias's soundproof studio in the basement of his house. On his massive monitors, 2 sound waves were displayed. The top one was the bank recording. The bottom one was a clip I had ripped from a YouTube video of Victoria giving an interview at a charity luncheon. Elias typed a command. The 2 waves overlapped. They didn't just look similar, they were identical in cadence, pitch, and modulation. He spun his chair around. It is a 99% match. Quinn, the vocal fry at the end of the sentences? That is unique. It is a fingerprint. That is not you on the phone. That is Victoria Hale. Can you testify to that? I asked. I can write a report that will make her lawyer wet his pants. Elias grinned. I thanked him and left, the report tucked safely in my bag. I had the location, I had the voice, I had the pattern of the debts. But there was one more piece, the motive. I went back to the USB drive and opened the folder of scanned journals. Arthur had kept a diary for 50 years. The entries from the last year were heartbreaking. October 3rd, he wrote in his shaky script. Victoria came by today. She didn't ask how my heart was. She didn't ask about the garden. She asked if I had reconsidered selling the bank shares. She says Daniel is in trouble. But when I asked Daniel, he says business is booming. Someone is lying. I think it is the one who smiles the most. I turned the page. November 10th. I saw the login alert on my phone this morning. 2 a.m. again. I called the bank, but they said the password was used correctly. I'm starting to feel like a ghost in my own accounts. Am I forgetting things? Or am I being erased? I read that line 3 times. Am I being erased? He knew, that night in the mansion, when he asked who logged in at 2 a.m, it wasn't a senile outburst. It was a trap. He had known for months. He was waiting to see if his son would confess. I flipped back to an entry from 3 years ago, right after he met Victoria. April 4th. Daniel introduced me to her. Charming woman, very sharp. Reminds me of that case I read about in the trade papers. The dispute in Oregon, the widow who sued the estate. I should look that up. I stopped. Arthur was a banker. He read financial trade papers like other people read comic books. He had recognized something about her. The dispute in Oregon. I pulled up a legal database. I searched for Victoria's maiden name. Nothing. Then I searched for marriage records. Victoria Hale. Before she was Victoria Hale, she was Victoria Stanton. And before that, she was Victoria Miller. I searched Victoria Miller Oregon estate dispute. A case file popped up from 10 years ago. Estate of James Miller versus Victoria Miller. James Miller was a wealthy architect. He died of a heart attack. His children from a first marriage sued Victoria, his second wife, claiming she had drained his accounts in the months leading up to his death. I called a friend of mine, a paralegal named Sarah who worked in Portland. Sarah, I need you to pull a physical file from the archives. I said, case number 44902. Look for depositions. Specifically, look for any mention of unauthorized access. She called me back an hour later. Quinn, you are not going to believe this, Sarah said. The children dropped the suit because they ran out of money. But in the initial deposition, the daughter claimed the passwords were changed. She claimed someone was logging into the father's investment portfolio in the middle of the night. Let me guess, I said, gripping the phone. 2 a.m? Close, Sarah said. 1:30 a.m, and the IP address was traced back to the marital home. I hung up. It wasn't just a crime of opportunity, it was a script. She had done this before. She found a man with assets and a soft heart. She isolated him. She took control of the digital keys. She drained the accounts while everyone was asleep. And when the man died, she played the grieving widow and fought the children for the scraps. Arthur had figured it out. That was why he scanned the journals. That was why he recorded the calls. He was building the case that his son was too blind to see. I looked at the pile of evidence on my desk, the spreadsheet of the gambling debts, the map of the IP address, the Soundwave report from Elias, the old case file from Oregon. It was a mosaic of a predator. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting a serial financial abuser who had walked away with a fortune once and thought she could do it again. I stacked the papers into a neat pile. I put the USB drive into a secure evidence bag. Arthur had done the heavy lifting. He had gathered the pieces while his heart was failing. He had left them for me, trusting that I would know what to do. I picked up a marker and wrote on the cover of the file folder, the 2 a.m. protocol. I wasn't going to just defend myself in court. I was going to dismantle her. I was going to take this evidence, and I was going to turn the victim narrative inside out. Tomorrow, I would meet with Gabe, my lawyer. I would show him this, and then we would prepare the trap. But first, I needed to sleep, for the first time since the funeral. I closed my eyes and didn't see the bruise on my face. I saw my grandfather winking at me. "Checkmate. Victoria," I whispered into the dark. "If you have never been the target of a high-priced crisis management firm, let me tell you what it feels like. It does not feel like a legal battle. It feels like a suffocation. It feels like the air in your own home is being slowly replaced by a poisonous gas, colorless and odorless, until you wake up one morning and realize you are the only person left on earth who believes you are still human." Victoria did not just hire a lawyer, she hired a demolition crew. They were called the Halo Image Group, a boutique PR firm based in Los Angeles that specialized in reputation recovery for disgraced politicians and caught red-handed celebrities. I looked them up. Their retainer fee alone was probably $50,000. That was $50,000 of my grandfather's money being used to paint me as a monster. It started on a Tuesday, 3 days after I had been placed on administrative leave. I woke up to a phone that would not stop vibrating. I picked it up and saw a notification from a news aggregator. "The heartbreak of the Marlowe estate. A widow's plea for justice." I clicked the link. It was a slickly produced video on a popular news site. There was Victoria, standing in front of the iron gates of the Harbor Heights mansion. She was wearing a simple gray sweater, no jewelry, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked exhausted. She looked devastatingly sympathetic. "I never wanted this fight," she said to the camera, her voice breaking perfectly. "Arthur was like a father to me. In his final days, he was so confused. He was scared. And now, to see his legacy torn apart because of unchecked greed, it just breaks my heart." The camera cut to a B-roll of her holding my father's hand. Daniel looked down at the ground, looking for all the world like a grieving son being bullied by a cruel daughter. Then came the comments, thousands of them. "Stay strong. Victoria, it is disgusting how some kids just wait for the inheritance. I heard the granddaughter is mentally unstable. Typical." I threw the phone onto the couch. I wanted to scream, but the walls of my apartment felt too thin. I felt like if I made a sound, the Halo Image Group would find a way to record it and remix it into a confession. But the video was just the opening salvo. By noon, the narrative had shifted from sad widow to dangerous granddaughter. A financial news blog, one that usually covered stock mergers, ran a headline that made my stomach drop. "North Sound investigator accused of weaponizing federal data in family dispute." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen. The article didn't have hard facts, but it had quotes, anonymous sources. Insiders suggest that Quinn Marlowe, a senior investigator, may have used restricted bureau software to bypass civilian banking security protocols. The article read, "Experts say such a breach would be a felony carrying a minimum sentence of 5 years. I wasn't just fighting for a house anymore. I was fighting for my freedom. Then came the email. My personal phone pinged with a forwarded message from the director of the bureau. He didn't add any text to it. He just forwarded it so I could see what they were dealing with. It was from Victoria. Subject: Urgent concern regarding Arthur Marlowe's privacy. Dear Director, I am writing to you with a heavy heart to report a potential misuse of your agency's power. My stepdaughter, Quinn Marlowe, has produced private banking logs that we believe she could not have obtained legally. Given her position in your department, we are terrified that she is using government tools to spy on our family. We are not experts, but we feel unsafe. We are asking you to investigate before she hurts anyone else. There was no proof, no evidence, just the word terrified and the word unsafe placed next to my name. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She wasn't accusing me directly. She was raising a concern. I closed my laptop. My hands were shaking. I wasn't allowed to log into the bureau servers to prove my innocence. They had cut my access. I was locked out, blindfolded, while she fired shots at me from the safety of the mansion I owned. The isolation spread like a virus. That evening, I went to the grocery store. I needed milk. I needed to feel like a normal person. As I was walking down the aisle, I saw Mrs. Higgins. She was a neighbor from Harbor Heights, a woman who had known me since I was 24. We used to discuss her rose garden. "Mrs. Higgins," I said, forcing a smile. She looked up. Her eyes widened. She didn't smile back. She looked at my cart, then at my face, and then she checked her watch. "Oh, hello. Quinn?" she said, her voice tight. I am in a terrible rush." She turned her cart around and walked away. She didn't just walk. She fled. I stood there next to the cereal boxes, realizing that in her eyes, I wasn't the girl who liked roses. I was the unstable woman from the TikTok videos. I was the abuser. My phone buzzed again, a text from a college friend I hadn't spoken to in a year. "Hey Q, just saw the article. Hope it is not true. If you need help finding a therapist, let me know. No judgment." I blocked the number. No judgment. That was the worst part. The fake compassion. The people who assumed that because it was in print, it must be true. They didn't ask for my side. They just wanted to be close enough to the drama to whisper about it. But the final blow, the one that nearly broke me, came from my father. I was sitting on my floor, surrounded by the printed logs from the USB drive, trying to stay focused on the data, when a notification popped up on my tablet. It was Facebook. Daniel Marlowe had posted a life event. It was a long post, 2,000 words. It was titled, "A Father's Heartbreak." I knew immediately that he hadn't written it. My father struggled to send a text message without typos. This post was grammatically perfect. It was flowery. It was strategic. "I have stayed silent for too long." The post began, "But I cannot watch my wife be demonized. The night of the incident, the night my daughter claims she was attacked, the truth is far more painful. Quinn was out of control. She was screaming at her grandfather. Victoria stepped in to protect him. Quinn threw herself against the wall in a fit of rage. We didn't call the police because I wanted to protect my little girl. I see now that was a mistake." I read it until the words blurred. Quinn threw herself against the wall. He was rewriting history. He was taking the moment his wife punched me, the moment he stood there and did nothing, and he was turning it into a story about my insanity. He was sacrificing his own daughter's sanity to save his wife's reputation. I put the tablet down. I walked to the bathroom and threw up. I sat on the cold tile floor, shivering. I felt completely, utterly alone. The world was loud, and every voice in it was screaming that I was the villain. Then, there was a knock at the door. I froze. The press? The police? I stood up, wiped my mouth, and looked through the peephole. It wasn't a reporter, it was Maya. And standing behind her, holding a 6-pack of cheap beer, was Jonah. Maya and Jonah were fellow investigators at the Bureau. We had spent 5 years sitting in the same cubicle cluster, eating stale donuts and tracking embezzlement schemes. I opened the door. "You are not supposed to be here," I said. "If the director finds out you are talking to a suspended agent." "Screw the director," Jonah said, pushing past me into the apartment. Maya followed him, closing the door and locking it. She looked at me, her eyes scanning the mess of papers on the floor. "You look like hell." "Quinn," she said. "Thanks," I said, leaning against the wall. "We saw the email," Jonah said, cracking open a beer and handing it to me. "The one she sent. Terrified. Unsafe. Give me a break." "It is complete garbage," Maya added. "We ran the audit logs on your terminal before they locked you out. We did it off the books. You never accessed those files on a government machine. You are clean." I took the beer. My hand was still shaking. It doesn't matter if I'm clean. It matters that she made the accusation. "It matters to us," Maya said fiercely. "We know you. Quinn, we know you don't hack. You trace. There is a difference." They stayed for 2 hours. They didn't offer legal advice. They didn't try to fix it. They just sat on my floor, drank bad beer, and let me know that I wasn't invisible. "You have the data, right?" Jonah asked as they were leaving. "The grandfather stuff?" I nodded. "It is all I have." "Then use it," he said. "Data doesn't have a PR team. Data doesn't lie on Facebook. Let the numbers do the talking." When they left, I felt a spark return. It was small, but it was there. I called Gabe Reddick. Gabe was a dinosaur of a lawyer. He operated out of a strip mall office that smelled of old coffee and toner. He wore suits that were 10 years out of style. But 40 years ago, when Gabe was a young public defender drowning in student loans, Arthur Marlowe had co-signed a loan for him when no one else would. Arthur had saved his career. Gabe had called me the day after the funeral. "I owe your grandfather." He had said, "I will take the case, pro bono if I have to." I met him the next morning at his office. I laid out the PR attacks, the articles, the Facebook post. "We need to sue them for defamation," I said, slamming the tablet onto his desk. "Look at this. Gabe, they are destroying me. We need to issue a statement. We need to go on TV." Gabe sat back in his creaky leather chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "No," he said. "What?" I stared at him. "Gabe, they are painting me as a felon." "If you engage, you validate," Gabe said calmly. "If you go on TV and scream that you are innocent, you look defensive. You look exactly like the unstable woman they are describing." "So I just let them lie?" "Yes," Gabe said. "Let them lie. Let them stack the lies so high that they block out the sun." He leaned forward. "Quinn, this is a trap. Victoria wants a mud fight. She is good at mud fights. She has the money, the PR firm, and the tearful act. You cannot beat her in the court of public opinion, not today." He tapped the file folder I had brought, the one labeled the 2AM protocol. "But this is a nuke, and you don't drop a nuke in a Twitter thread. You drop it in a courtroom, under oath, when they have nowhere to run." He opened the folder and looked at the report from Elias Monroe regarding the voice match. He looked at the IP logs. A slow, wolfish smile spread across his face. "She is overplaying her hand," Gabe said. "She is so busy trying to destroy your reputation that she is forgetting to cover her digital tracks. Every interview she gives, every post she approves, she is locking herself into a narrative." He looked at me. "Here is what we are going to do. You are going to go dark. No social media, no interviews, no defending yourself to neighbors. You are going to let them think they have won. You are going to let them think you are cowering in the dark. And while they are celebrating," Gabe continued, "we are going to archive everything, every lie, every inconsistency. We are going to turn their PR campaign into Exhibit B." It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. For the next 2 weeks, I became a ghost. I didn't leave my apartment except to see Gabe. I didn't answer my phone. I let the world think Quinn Marlowe had been crushed. But inside the apartment, I was working. I set up a recording system. I archived the web pages. I downloaded the podcasts. I created a timeline of their lies and cross-referenced it with the timeline of the truth. Lie. Victoria claimed on a podcast she was at the hospital the moment Arthur died. Fact. Hospital logs showed she swiped into the parking garage 40 minutes after his time of death. Lie. Daniel posted that he never asked Arthur for money. Fact. Bank transfer 4092 shows $10,000 sent to Daniel's personal account with the memo, "Help." I was building a wall of contradictions. One night, around 11 o'clock, I was pacing my living room, unable to sleep. The silence of the apartment was oppressive. I turned on the TV, just to have some background noise. It was a local talk show, and there she was. Victoria was sitting on a plush beige couch, opposite a sympathetic host. She looked radiant and tragic all at once. "It has been so hard," Victoria was saying, wiping a delicate tear. "We just want to heal. But Quinn, she just won't let us. She is obsessed with this idea that there is some conspiracy. It is sad, really. Paranoia is a terrible disease." I reached for the remote to turn it off. I wanted to throw the remote through the screen. But then, I stopped. My hand hovered over the power button. "Paranoia," she had said. I looked at the recording light on my DVR. It was off. I pressed the record button. The red light blinked on. I sat down on the floor, right in front of the TV. I watched her. I watched the way her eyes shifted to the left when she lied. I watched the way she touched her necklace when she felt nervous. "We never cared about the money," Victoria said on the screen. I would give every cent of the estate to charity if it meant having Arthur back. I pulled out my notebook. I wrote down the time. I wrote down the quote. Give every cent to charity. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that hurt my split lip. I wasn't the victim watching her tormentor anymore. I was the investigator watching a suspect dig her own grave. Keep talking, Victoria, I whispered to the screen. Keep talking. Every word you say is another nail I am going to hammer into your coffin. The interview ended. The host hugged her. The credits rolled. I saved the recording. I backed it up to the cloud. I backed it up to an external hard drive. Then, I turned off the TV. The room went dark. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid of the dark. I felt comfortable in it. The dark was where I did my best work. They had taken my reputation. They had taken my family. But they had forgotten the one thing my grandfather had taught me, and the one thing my job had drilled into me. The louder the suspect screams, the more they are trying to hide. And Victoria was screaming very, very loudly. The civil trial for the estate of Arthur Marlowe began on a Tuesday that felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a public execution. The air in courtroom 4B was thick, recycled, and smelled faintly of damp wool and adrenaline. Every seat in the gallery was filled. I could feel the heat radiating from the bodies behind me, the scratch of pens on notepads, and the soft, rhythmic clicking of laptop keys as reporters prepared to broadcast my humiliation to the world. Judge Vance sat on the bench, his face a mask of bored neutrality, but I saw the way his eyes flickered toward the cameras in the back. This was a high-profile case now. The story of the banking tycoon, the grieving widow, and the greedy investigator granddaughter had captured the local imagination. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table. She was a vision of tragic elegance. She wore a navy blue suit that was modest, yet undeniably expensive. Her hair pulled back to reveal a neck that looked fragile. Beside her, Colin Drake, her lawyer, looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He stood up to give his opening statement, buttoning his jacket with a slow, deliberate movement that commanded the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Your Honor," Drake began, his voice a rich baritone that filled the space without effort. "We are here today to talk about betrayal. Not the betrayal of a contract, but the betrayal of a heart." He walked over to Victoria and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She lowered her eyes. For the last 5 years, this woman was the only family Arthur Marlowe truly had. She cooked his meals. She drove him to his appointments. She listened to his stories when his own blood relatives were too busy chasing their careers to pick up the phone. He turned and pointed a finger at me. It felt like a physical blow. And while Victoria was caring for the man, Quinn Marlowe was calculating his worth. You will hear testimony today that paints a disturbing picture. A picture of a granddaughter who used her professional skills designed to catch criminals, to manipulate, intimidate, and control a dying man. You will hear how she isolated him, how she confused him with complex financial jargon, and how, in the end, she forced him to sign a will that contradicted everything he had said for years. I sat stone still, my hands clenched in my lap so tight, my fingernails were digging into my palms. Beside me, my lawyer, Gabe Reddick, was drawing calm, geometric shapes on his legal pad. "Let them talk. Quinn," he had whispered to me before we walked in, "let them build the tower high before we kick out the foundation." But it was hard to wait when the bricks were landing on my head. Victoria took the stand first. She moved with a hesitancy that suggested deep emotional pain. When the bailiff swore her in, her voice trembled. Drake guided her through the early years, establishing her devotion to Arthur. Then, he pivoted to me. "Ms. Hale Marlowe, can you tell the court about the relationship between Quinn and her grandfather in those final months?" Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. It was strained. She said softly, "Quinn was angry. She was always angry. She felt that Arthur owed her something." "Can you give us an example?" Victoria took a deep breath, looking directly at the jury. "There was a night in September, about 2 months before Arthur passed. Quinn came to the mansion. She was demanding money. She said her government salary wasn't enough to support the lifestyle she deserved. When Arthur refused to write her a check, she lost control. I stared at her, my mouth opened slightly. This was a fabrication so pure it was almost impressive. "What did she do?" Drake asked gently. "She started screaming," Victoria said, a tear finally sliding down her cheek. "She picked up a vase, a Ming vase that Arthur loved, and she threw it against the fireplace," she said. "If I can't have it, no one can." It broke Arthur's heart. He was terrified of her. Liar. I screamed inside my head. I gripped the edge of the table. I looked at my father, sitting in the front row of the gallery. He was staring at his knees. He knew it was a lie. He knew I had never asked for a dime, but he said nothing. Gabe placed a heavy hand on my arm, grounding me. "Do not react," he murmured. Drake wasn't done. He walked back to his table and picked up a piece of paper. "Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit C, an email sent from Arthur Marlowe to his personal legal advisor, dated October 4th. He handed the paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. "Please read the highlighted section. Ms. Hale Marlowe." Victoria squinted at the paper. It says, "Quinn is becoming a problem. She is interfering in my finances more every day. I do not know if I can stop her. She has access to everything." The courtroom murmured. I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered that email. Arthur had told me about it. He had written it as part of his trap. He wanted to see if Victoria, who monitored his sent folder, would react to the news that I was interfering. It was bait, but read out of context, in this sterile room, it sounded like a cry for help from a victimized old man. "See?" Drake said, turning to the jury. Even Arthur knew he was being hunted by his own granddaughter. When it was my turn to take the stand, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. I could feel the hostility. The jury looked at me with suspicion. To them, I wasn't the hero. I was the predator. Drake approached the witness stand. He didn't smile. He looked at me like I was a bug under a microscope. "Ms. Marlowe, you work for the North Sound Financial Crimes Bureau, correct?" "Yes," I said. My voice was steady, but my throat was dry. "And your job involves hacking? Breaking into secure accounts? Tracing hidden assets?" "It involves forensic accounting and legal data retrieval." I corrected. "I operate within the law." Drake smirked. "Of course, but you have the skills to bypass security, don't you? You know how to reset passwords. You know how to spoof IP addresses." "I have technical knowledge, yes." "And you use that knowledge to help your grandfather with his banking?" "I helped him when he asked. He was having trouble with the digital interface." "So you had his passwords?" "He gave them to me." "And you had access to his transfer portal?" "Yes, but—" "Thank you." Drake cut me off. "So, we have a woman trained in financial espionage, who admits to having full access to the victim's accounts, and whose own grandfather wrote an email saying she was interfering." He leaned in close, invading my personal space. "Tell me, Ms. Marlowe, did it make you feel powerful, controlling the purse strings of a man who built an empire? Did it make you feel like you were finally in charge?" "Objection!" Gabe shouted, standing up, argumentative. "Sustained," Judge Vance said, but the damage was done. I looked out at the gallery. I saw a young woman in the second row typing furiously on her phone. I could imagine the tweets. "Justice for Victoria. The granddaughter is a psycho. Look at her face. She looks cold." I felt stripped naked. All the evidence I had, the voice analysis, the gambling debts, the IP logs. Gabe had insisted we hold them back. Wait for the rebuttal. He had said, let them commit to their story first. But it felt like we had waited too long. It felt like I was drowning in their narrative before I could even take a breath. Drake walked back to his table. He looked at Victoria, who gave him a small, brave nod. "Your Honor," Drake said, his voice grave, "given the testimony we have heard and the disturbing nature of Ms. Marlowe's behavior as described by the family, The plaintiff has a request. He picked up a motion. We believe that Quinn Marlowe's actions were not just motivated by greed, but by a deep-seated psychological instability. We believe she has been projecting the trauma of her mother's death onto her grandfather. Therefore, we are asking the court to order a full psychological evaluation of the defendant to determine her mental state at the time the will was changed. The room went silent. I froze. A psych eval. If the judge granted this, the trial would stop. The narrative would shift permanently from financial dispute to mental health crisis. Even if I passed, the headline would be, "Investigator ordered to undergo psychiatric testing." My career would be over. My credibility would be incinerated. Gabe shot out of his chair. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. This is a blatant attempt to smear my client's character without a shred of medical evidence." "Is it?" Drake countered calmly. "We have testimony of violent outbursts. We have the grandfather's own words fearing interference. It seems prudent to ask why a young woman would attack the people she claims to love." Judge Vance looked at me. He studied my face. I tried to look sane. I tried to look calm. But inside, I was screaming. I was thinking about my mother, about how much I missed her, and how dare they use her name to weaponize my grief. The judge tapped his pen on the bench. He looked conflicted. "This is a serious request, Mr. Drake," Judge Vance said slowly, "but given the gravity of the accusations—" He paused. The air in the room was static. "I will take it under advisement," the judge said. "We will recess for 15 minutes. I want to see counsel in my chambers before I rule on this motion." The gavel banged. I stumbled off the stand. My legs felt like jelly. Gabe grabbed my elbow and steered me quickly through the side door, into a small consultation room reserved for defendants. He kicked the door shut and spun around. "Quinn, listen to me," he said, his voice urgent. "They are winning." "Gabe," I said, my voice shaking. "Did you hear him? He is going to make me look crazy. If the judge orders that eval, I am finished. Why didn't you use the logs? Why didn't you use the recording?" "Because we need them to be all in," Gabe snapped. He wasn't the gentle old lawyer anymore. He was intense. "Look, Drake just put all his chips on the Quinn is crazy bet. He just committed to the narrative that you are violent and unstable." "So what?" I cried. "So, if we can prove, irrefutably, that the violence didn't come from you, but from them, their entire case collapses. Not just the financial part, the character part, the psychological part. It all falls down." I sank into a plastic chair. "But we don't have proof of the violence. Gabe, it is her word against mine. Dad won't speak up. The vase story, it is a lie. But I can't prove I didn't break a vase 6 months ago." Gabe paced the small room. "We need something physical, something that anchors the timeline." There was a knock on the door. We ignored it. "Quinn, think," Gabe said. "Was there anyone else there that night? The night she hit you?" "No," I said, putting my head in my hands. "Just Dad. And he is useless." The knock came again, louder this time. "Go away," Gabe shouted at the door. The door opened anyway. I looked up, ready to snap at a reporter. It wasn't a reporter. It was Mrs. Ortega. She was standing in the doorway, clutching her heavy wool coat. She looked terrified, her eyes darting back and forth as if she expected Victoria to jump out of the shadows. She was holding an old, battered tablet in her hands. "Mrs. Ortega?" I stood up. "What are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. Victoria will fire you." She already did. "Mrs. Ortega said, her voice thick with her accent. "This morning, when I told her I wouldn't lie about the broken vase, she stepped into the room and closed the door. I heard on the radio," Mrs. Ortega said, looking at me with tears in her eyes, "they say you are crazy. They say you break things." She walked over to the table and placed the tablet down. Her hands were trembling. "I cleaned that house for 5 years, Miss Quinn. I know every corner. I know every stain." She looked at Gabe, then back to me. You told the police there were no cameras inside, right? Because Mrs. Victoria had them removed from the living room last year? Yes, I said. The security system only covers the exterior and the gates. The interior is blind. That is why she felt safe hitting me. Mrs. Ortega shook her head slowly. A sad, knowing smile touched her lips. She removed the cameras, yes, but she forgot about the vanity. The vanity? I asked, confused. The hallway, Mrs. Ortega said. The long hallway leading to the office, where you fell, where the vase broke. Yes? There is a mirror there, the big one with the gold frame. I nodded. I knew it. I had checked my reflection in it 1,000 times. Mrs. Victoria bought it 2 years ago. Mrs. Ortega said, it is one of those smart mirrors. For fitness, it has a camera to check your form when you exercise. I stared at her. A smart mirror. She never used it for exercise. Mrs. Ortega continued. She just liked how expensive it looked. She turned it off. But what? Gabe asked, leaning in. But the motion sensor. Mrs. Ortega whispered, it stays on. It is designed to wake up the system if someone moves in front of it abruptly, like if someone falls or if someone is pushed. My heart stopped. I remembered falling. I remembered hitting the console table. I remembered the tiny red light blinking on the wall. I thought it was a glass break sensor. It wakes up, Mrs. Ortega said, tapping the tablet screen, and it records the first 30 seconds of the workout to the cloud. She swiped a finger across the cracked screen of her tablet. I have the admin password, she said, because she made me dust it every day. And she was too lazy to log in herself to clean the smudges, so she gave me the code to put it in cleaning mode. She pressed play. The video was grainy. It was taken from a low angle, but the image was unmistakable. It showed a hallway. It showed me, walking away. It showed Victoria, lunging forward. It showed her hand connecting with my face. It showed me falling, and then, clear as day, it picked up the audio. You listen to me, you little spy. You can go to your precious police, but you will be homeless. Gabe let out a breath that sounded like a whistle. Holy Mother of God, he whispered. He looked at me. His eyes were shining. Quinn, he said, do you know what this is? I looked at the frozen image of Victoria's snarling face on the screen. This isn't just evidence, I said, feeling the strength return to my limbs. It is the nuke. Gabe grabbed his briefcase. Mrs. Ortega, you are going to be our next witness. Quinn, fix your hair. Wipe your face. He opened the door to the courtroom. We are going back in there, Gabe said, a savage grin appearing on his face, and we are going to give Mr. Drake his psychological evaluation, but I don't think he's going to like the diagnosis. I walked back into the courtroom. The judge was returning to the bench. Victoria was smiling at the jury, looking confident, thinking she had won. I sat down. I looked at her, and for the first time in 5 years, I smiled back. It was the smile of a hunter who had just sprung the trap. The recess ended, and the bailiff called the room to order. The atmosphere had changed. Before the break, the air had been heavy with the weight of my impending defeat. Now, it crackled with the static electricity of a coming storm. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded on top of the battered tablet Mrs. Ortega had smuggled in, beside me. Gabe Reddick was no longer the tired, strip mall lawyer. He looked like a gladiator who had just been handed a sword. Judge Vance swept in, his robes billowing. He looked annoyed. Mr. Drake, he said, looking at the defense table. Regarding your motion for a psychological evaluation of Ms. Marlowe? Your Honor, Gabe interrupted, standing up. His voice was loud, cutting through the drone of the room. Before you rule on that motion, the plaintiff requests permission to introduce rebuttal evidence that has just come into our possession, evidence that directly impeaches the testimony Mrs. Hale Marlowe gave under oath less than an hour ago. Colin Drake stood up slowly, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought we were desperate. Your Honor, this is a trial by ambush. Drake said lazily. Whatever scraps Ms. Marlowe has dug up during the recess cannot possibly outweigh the sworn testimony of the victim. It is digital forensic evidence, Your Honor, Gabe said, ignoring Drake. It pertains specifically to the violent incident Mrs. Hale Marlowe described. Judge Vance paused. He looked at Gabe, then at the tablet on our table. I will allow it, the judge said, but make it quick. Mr. Reddick, I have little patience for games. Gabe nodded. He picked up the tablet and plugged it into the courtroom's presentation system. The large monitors mounted on the walls flickered to life. Mrs. Hale Marlowe testified that on the night of September 14th, Quinn Marlowe threw a vase in a fit of rage. Gabe said, addressing the jury, she testified that there were no cameras in the house to record this event. He paused. She was half right. The security cameras had been removed. But she forgot about the smart mirror in the hallway, a device designed to analyze posture during workouts. A device that automatically records when its vibration sensors are triggered by a heavy impact, like a body hitting a wall. Victoria's head snapped up. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like the blood had been sucked out of her by a vacuum. Gabe hit the spacebar. On the screens, a grainy, fisheye video appeared. It was black and white, capturing the long corridor of the mansion. The timestamp in the corner read, September 14th. In the video, two figures appeared. One was me, walking away, my back to the camera. The other was Victoria. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Not a cough, not a rustle of paper. 300 people held their breath. On the screen, Victoria lunged. It was not the movement of a terrified victim. It was the strike of a cobra. She grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. The camera's microphone, designed to pick up breathing patterns, captured the audio with chilling clarity. "Who do you think you are?" the digital Victoria screamed. Then, the slap. It was a sharp, brutal sound. The force of it sent me stumbling back. I hit the console table. The vase wobbled and crashed. The video did not stop there. It showed Victoria grabbing me by the lapels, shaking me while I sat dazed on the floor. "You will regret touching my money," the recording hissed. "You will be homeless." Gabe froze the frame right there, right on Victoria's snarling face, her hand raised for another strike. He turned to the jury. "Who looks like the aggressor to you?" Gabe asked softly. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't a roar. It was a collective gasp of shock that rippled through the gallery. The reporters in the back row were typing so fast it sounded like heavy rain. Judge Vance banged his gavel, his face thunderous. "Order! Order in this court!" Victoria was staring at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at Drake, but for the first time, her shark of a lawyer looked terrified. He knew, just as I did, that perjury was a felony. Gabe didn't give them time to recover. "Your Honor, since we have established that the defendant lied about the violence, we would like to address the instability she claims my client suffers from. Specifically, the email from Arthur Marlowe that Mr. Drake introduced as Exhibit C." Gabe pulled a piece of paper from his briefcase. "Mr. Drake showed you an email where Arthur wrote that Quinn was interfering, but Mr. Drake only showed you the email Arthur sent to his lawyer. He didn't show you the email Arthur sent to himself 5 minutes later." Gabe placed the document on the projector. Subject, the trap. The email header read. Gabe read it aloud. "I sent the email complaining about Quinn just now. I want to see how long it takes for Victoria to mention it. I suspect she is reading my sent folder. If she brings it up at dinner, I will know she has my passwords." The jury looked from the screen to Victoria. She was shrinking in her seat, looking smaller and smaller. Arthur Marlowe wasn't confused, Gabe said, his voice rising. He was conducting a counterintelligence operation in his own home, and he caught the spy. Gabe motioned to me. I stood up and handed him the USB drive. "We have heard a lot about 2 a.m, Gabe said. "The defense claims Quinn Marlowe logged into the accounts at that hour to steal." He plugged the USB in. A spreadsheet appeared on the screens. "This is the server log from the bank. It shows the login at 2 a.m. It shows the IP address of the mansion. But here's what the defense missed. Gabe pointed to a column of numbers. This is the MAC address, the unique digital fingerprint of the device used to log in. He pulled up a second document. And this is the device log from the home Wi-Fi router. This MAC address does not belong to Quinn Marlowe's laptop. It does not belong to Arthur's desktop. He turned and pointed a finger directly at Victoria. It belongs to an iPad Pro named Victoria's iPad, the same device used to check her Gmail, her Facebook, and her Nordstrom account 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after the bank login. The gallery was buzzing now. I heard the words busted and thief whispered loudly. But Gabe wasn't done. He was a man possessed. He wanted to bury them. We have one more witness to call regarding the identity of the person accessing these accounts. Gabe said, "The defense claims Quinn Marlowe called the bank to reset passwords. We call Elias Monroe." Elias took the stand. He looked professional, serious. Nothing like the guy who drank cheap beer on my floor 2 weeks ago. "Mr. Monroe, can you identify the voice on this recording?" Gabe asked, playing the clip of the woman pretending to be me. "I can," Elias said. "I performed a spectral analysis. The voice print is a 99% match to Victoria Hale Marlowe. It is statistically impossible for it to be Quinn Marlowe." "Thank you," Gabe said. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence, a video found on Arthur Marlowe's personal laptop, recorded 3 days before his stroke. He intended it to be played in the event of a dispute just like this one." Judge Vance nodded. "Play it." The lights in the courtroom seemed to dim. On the massive screens, my grandfather appeared. He was sitting in his study, wearing his favorite cardigan. He looked tired, his skin papery and pale. But his eyes, those sharp, gray banker's eyes, were clear and focused. He leaned into the camera. "My name is Arthur Marlowe." The video began. "And if you are watching this, it means I am gone, and it means they have come for the money." I felt a lump form in my throat. It was the first time I had seen him move, seen him speak, since the funeral. "I want to be clear," Arthur said, his voice steady. "I am of sound mind. I know exactly who is loyal to me and who is waiting for me to die." He picked up a piece of paper in the video. "I created a bait account," he said. "I set the password to Buster123, the name of my old dog. I left the note on my desk where anyone snooping could find it. Last night, at 2 in the morning. Someone used that password. They tried to transfer $50,000. Arthur leaned back, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "It wasn't Quinn." He said, "Quinn has never asked me for a penny. She is the only one who asks me how I am sleeping. The others, they only ask where the checkbook is." He looked directly into the lens, as if he were staring across time into the courtroom. "To the judge, or the jury, or whoever is deciding this," Arthur said, "do not let them lie about my granddaughter. She is the only Marlowe left who understands that a name is worth more than a balance sheet. I leave her everything because she is the only one strong enough to protect it." The video ended. The screen went black. For a moment, the silence held. It was a heavy, respectful silence. I wiped a tear from my cheek. He had done it. He had protected me from beyond the grave. Then, the noise began. It started in the back. Reporters were standing up, rushing for the doors to call in the scoop. The live stream comments, which I couldn't see but could feel, were shifting. The hashtag Justice for Victoria was dead. A new one was rising. Don't mess with Grandpa. Drake was sitting with his head in his hands. He knew it was over. He knew he had just suborned perjury. But Victoria didn't know, or rather, she refused to accept it. She stood up, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "It is fake!" she screamed. Her voice cracked, high and hysterical. "It is a deep fake. She edited it. She is a hacker." "Victoria, sit down," Drake hissed, grabbing her arm. "No!" Victoria shouted, pulling away. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Look at her. She is laughing. She manipulated him. That video is a lie. Arthur loved me. He would never say that. Judge Vance banged his gavel. Ms. Hale Marlowe, sit down immediately. She didn't listen. The mask had completely shattered. The elegant widow was gone. In her place was a desperate, cornered animal. "You are all idiots," she shrieked, turning to the jury. "Can't you see? She set me up. She planted that mirror. She made him say those things. It is my house. I earned it. I took care of him while she was out playing detective." She lunged toward my table, her eyes wild. "I will kill you," she screamed. "You ungrateful little—" "Bailiffs!" Judge Vance roared. 2 officers tackled her before she could reach me. They grabbed her arms and forced her back. She was kicking and screaming, a stream of profanity pouring from her mouth that would have made a sailor blush. I sat perfectly still. I didn't flinch. I watched as the woman who had terrorized my father, who had stolen from my grandfather, and who had tried to destroy my life was dragged back to her seat. She looked deranged. Her hair had come loose from its bun. Her expensive suit was rumpled. Judge Vance glared down at her, his face red with anger. "Mrs. Hale Marlowe," he boomed, "you are in contempt of this court. Another outburst like that, and I will have you removed and placed in a holding cell. Do you understand me?" Victoria was panting, her chest heaving. She looked at the jury. They were staring at her with expressions of horror and disgust. She looked at the reporters. They were filming her breakdown with hungry eyes. She looked at my father. Daniel was sitting in the front row. He wasn't looking at his knees anymore. He was looking at her, and on his face, for the first time in 5 years, there was no adoration. There was no fear. There was only the cold, hard realization that he had been sleeping next to a monster. Victoria slumped into her chair, defeated. She covered her face with her hands, but it was too late to hide. The cameras had seen everything. The mirror had seen everything. Arthur had seen everything. Gabe leaned over to me. "I think," he whispered, a dry smile touching his lips, "that we can skip the closing arguments." I looked at the black screen where my grandfather's face had been. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered. The tide had not just turned, it had crashed down, and it was washing the filth away. The aftershocks of the smart mirror video were still vibrating through the courtroom when Gabe Reddick stood up to call our next witness. The room was electric, the kind of charged atmosphere where anything feels possible. Even justice. Victoria sat slumped in her chair, her face a mask of smoldering ruin, while Colin Drake frantically whispered into her ear, likely telling her that their ship was taking on water faster than he could bail. "Your Honor, the defense calls Lila Gardner to the stand," Gabe announced. A ripple of confusion went through the gallery. I watched Victoria's back stiffen. She knew that name. It was a name from a life she thought she had buried under layers of legal settlements and name changes. Lila walked down the center aisle. She was a woman in her early 30s, dressed in a modest cardigan and jeans that looked out of place among the sea of tailored suits. She looked terrified, clutching her purse with white knuckles. But when her eyes landed on me, she gave a small, grim nod. We had never met in person, only over encrypted video calls, but we shared a bond forged in the fire of the same predator. "Who is this?" Drake stood up, feigning ignorance. This witness was not on the original discovery list regarding the Marlowe estate. "She is a rebuttal witness, Your Honor," Gabe said smoothly. "She is here to establish a pattern of behavior, a modus operandi that speaks directly to Mrs. Hale Marlowe's intent." Judge Vance peered over his glasses. "I will allow it. Proceed." Lila took the stand. She swore the oath, her voice shaking slightly. "Ms. Gardner," Gabe began, standing in the center of the room, "can you tell the court how you know the plaintiff, Victoria Hale Marlowe?" Lila took a deep breath. She looked directly at Victoria, who refused to meet her gaze. "I know her as Victoria Miller," Lila said. "She was my stepmother. She married my father, James Miller, in Portland, Oregon, 10 years ago. And where is your father now?" "He passed away," Lila whispered. "Heart failure." "I am sorry for your loss," Gabe said gently. "During the final year of your father's life, Did you notice anything unusual about his finances? Objection, Drake shouted. Relevance. The financial history of a man in Oregon has no bearing on Arthur Marlowe's estate. It has every bearing. Your Honor, Gabe shot back. We are establishing that the plaintiff has a history of isolating wealthy, elderly men and accessing their accounts via digital backdoors. Overruled, the judge said. The witness may answer. Lila steadied herself. Yes, she said. About 6 months before Dad died, he started complaining that he was locked out of his investment accounts. He said the passwords kept changing. When I asked Victoria, she said Dad was just being forgetful. She said she was handling it for him. Gabe walked closer to the stand. And did you ever discover when these accounts were being accessed? Lila nodded. After he died, we subpoenaed the logs for the lawsuit. The logins always happened late at night, usually around 1 or 1:30 in the morning. The courtroom went deadly silent. The parallel was impossible to ignore. 1:30 in the morning in Oregon, 2 in the morning in Seattle. And did you ever recover the money? Gabe asked. No, Lila said, tears forming in her eyes. By the time we got the court order, the accounts were empty. She claimed it was for medical expenses and home renovations. We couldn't afford to keep fighting her. She took everything. The house, the savings, my dad's vintage car collection, everything. Lila looked at Victoria, her voice gaining strength. She does this. She finds good men who are lonely. She moves in. She changes the locks. She changes the passwords. And she waits for them to die. Drake launched into a cross-examination, trying to paint Lila as a bitter stepchild who was just angry she didn't get a payout. But it didn't stick. The jury looked from Lila's tear-stained face to the cold, hard profile of Victoria, and they saw the truth. They saw the pattern. When Lila stepped down, she walked past my table. I reached out and squeezed her hand. Thank you, I mouthed. She squeezed back, her hand cold but firm. We didn't let up. Gabe immediately called Mrs. Ortega back to the stand. The housekeeper looked small in the witness box, but her indignation made her seem 10 feet tall. Mrs. Ortega, Gabe asked, you worked for the Marlowes for 5 years. Did you ever see Arthur Marlowe upset when he left the mansion? Every Sunday, Mrs. Ortega said, her accent thick with emotion. He would come for brunch. He would bring donuts. He was happy. But then, after talking to Mrs. Victoria, he would leave looking heavy, like he was carrying stones in his pockets. Did you ever hear what they talked about? Money. Mrs. Ortega spat the word out. Always money. She would tell him the roof needed fixing when it didn't. She would tell him Mr. Daniel needed a loan for the business. One time, I heard Mr. Arthur say to her, Victoria, you are bleeding me dry. And she just laughed. She said, Arthur, you have so much blood. You won't even miss a drop. The jury gasped. That line, you won't even miss a drop, painted a picture of cruelty that no amount of PR spin could erase. Next came Dr. Eris Thorne, Arthur's cardiologist. He was a no-nonsense man with silver hair and a demeanor that demanded respect. Dr. Thorne, Gabe asked, in the months leading up to his stroke, was Arthur Marlowe confused? Was he senile? Absolutely not. The doctor replied crisp and clear. Arthur was sharp as a tack. He could recite his blood pressure stats better than my nurses. Did he ever express concerns about his family? Yes. About 2 months ago, he asked me to document our sessions on video. He said, I want proof that I am sane, Aris, because when I am gone, the vultures are going to say I lost my mind to justify picking my bones clean. Gabe let that hang in the air. Vultures. It was exactly what Victoria looked like right now, hunched over her legal pad, scratching frantically with a pen. Finally, it was time for the last witness, the one I had been dreading, the one whose testimony would either save me or destroy the last shred of love I had for him. The defense calls Daniel Marlowe. My father stood up. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. His suit, usually perfectly pressed, looked slightly large on him, as if he had shrunk in the wash. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Victoria. He looked at the empty space between us. He took the stand. The bailiff swore him in. Gabe approached him. He didn't use the aggressive tone he had used with Victoria. He was quiet, almost sympathetic. He knew that Daniel Marlowe wasn't the villain of this story. He was the weapon Victoria had used. "Mr. Marlowe," Gabe said. "Daniel, I want to ask you about the night of October 14th. The night the bank logs show a login at 2 in the morning. Daniel cleared his throat. It was a dry, rattling sound. "Okay. Your wife's lawyer claimed that everyone in the house was asleep at that time. He claimed that Quinn must have broken in digitally because she was the only one awake." Gabe paused. "Where were you?" "Daniel, at 2 in the morning on October 14th? Daniel shifted in his seat. He looked at Victoria. She was staring at him with eyes that promised retribution. If looks could kill, my father would have dropped dead right there on the stand. But he looked away from her. He looked at me. "I wasn't home," Daniel said softly. "Can you speak up, please?" "I wasn't home," Daniel repeated, his voice cracking. "I was in the city." "Where in the city?" "At the Sovereign Hotel." "And what were you doing at the Sovereign Hotel at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday?" Daniel closed his eyes. I was playing poker." The gallery murmured. The grieving son, the devoted husband, was actually a gambling addict hiding out in a casino while his father's accounts were being drained. "And did you win?" Gabe asked. "No," Daniel whispered. I lost about $15,000. $15,000, Gabe repeated. "That is the exact amount transferred out of Arthur's account that night." Gabe walked back to the table and picked up a document. "We have the security footage from the casino. Daniel, it confirms you were there until 4 in the morning. So, you could not have logged into the bank account from the mansion." "No," Daniel said. "So that leaves 2 people in the house who had access to the Wi-Fi. Your daughter, Quinn, and your wife, Victoria." Daniel nodded. "Yes." Gabe leaned against the railing of the jury box. "To authorize that transfer. Daniel, the bank sends a one-time passcode to your phone. It is a security measure." "Yes." "But you were at the casino, so how did the person in the mansion get the code?" Daniel hesitated. He gripped the armrests of the chair until his knuckles turned white. This was the moment he had to choose between his addiction and the truth. "I left my phone at home," Daniel said, his voice barely audible. I have a burner phone I use for the games. Victoria doesn't like me gambling, so I leave my real phone on my nightstand so she can check my location and think I am in bed." Gabe nodded slowly. "So, your phone, the phone that receives the bank codes, was on the nightstand, next to your wife, while she was in bed?" "Yes." "So Victoria is the only person who could have seen that code?" Daniel looked down at his hands. "Yes." Victoria let out a sound that was half gasp, half growl. She slammed her hand down on the table. "Daniel!" she hissed. Judge Vance banged his gavel. "Counsel, control your client." Gabe didn't flinch. He moved to the final line of questioning, the one that mattered most to me. "Daniel, I want to talk about the incident in the hallway. The night Quinn was injured." My father flinched. "We saw the video. Daniel, we saw your wife strike your daughter. We saw her throw Quinn into a wall." "Yes," Daniel whispered. "But in your sworn deposition, and in a Facebook post published under your name 2 weeks ago, you claimed Quinn was the aggressor. You claimed she threw herself into the wall." Daniel didn't answer. "Why did you lie?" "Daniel?" Gabe asked gently. "I didn't write that post," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "Victoria's PR team wrote it. She told me if I didn't post it, we would lose the lawsuit. She said we would lose the house. She said I had to protect the family." "By sacrificing your daughter?" Gabe asked. Daniel looked at me then. His eyes were filled with tears. He looked old. He looked broken. "I was scared," he said. "I am in so much debt. I thought if we just got the inheritance, I could fix everything. I could pay everyone back. I could make it right." So you watched your wife assault your daughter, and you stayed silent for money?
I
Daniel, answer the question. Did you witness your wife physically attack Quinn Marlowe, an adult woman, because she confronted her about the stolen money? The silence stretched. It felt like it lasted for hours. I held my breath, waiting for him to defend her one last time, waiting for him to say it was an accident. But he didn't. Yes, Daniel said. The word hung in the air like smoke. Yes, I saw it. And what did you do? Nothing, Daniel whispered. The tears spilled over now, running down his gray cheeks. I did nothing. He looked straight at me, ignoring the judge, ignoring the jury, ignoring the wife who was vibrating with rage beside him. I was wrong, he choked out. I was wrong not to protect my child. I am so sorry. Quinn, I am so sorry. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. It was a moment of pure, raw human tragedy. A father admitting he had sold his daughter for a chance to clear his gambling debts. No further questions, Gabe said softly. The judge called for a recess. As the courtroom cleared, I stayed in my seat for a moment, processing it. My father had finally spoken up. It was 5 years too late, and it didn't undo the bruise or the betrayal, but it was something. I stood up and walked toward the exit. In the corridor outside the courtroom, chaos was unfolding. Victoria had cornered Daniel near the water fountains. She wasn't whispering anymore. She didn't care who heard her. "You idiot!" she was hissing, her face contorted into a mask of ugly, desperate fury. "You spineless coward! Do you have any idea what you just did? You just handed her the case." Daniel stood with his back against the wall, looking at the floor. "We are going to lose," Victoria spat, grabbing the lapel of his jacket and shaking him. "We are going to lose everything. The house, the accounts. We will be on the streets. Daniel, do you hear me? On the streets." She raised her hand. I saw the motion. It was the same motion she had used on me in the hallway. She was going to slap him. She was going to punish him the only way she knew how. I started to move forward, to intervene, but I stopped. Daniel looked up. He saw the hand raised. And for the first time in their marriage, he didn't flinch. He reached up and caught her wrist. It wasn't a violent grab. It was firm. He held her hand in midair, staring at her with a look I had never seen on his face before. It was the look of a man who had just woken up from a long, terrible nightmare. "Don't," Daniel said. His voice was low, rough, but steady. Victoria stared at him, shocked. She tried to pull her hand away, but he held on. "Let go of me," she screeched. "You worried about being on the streets?" Daniel said, pushing her hand away from him with a shove that sent her stumbling back a step. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you hit my daughter." He straightened his jacket. He looked at her with pure disgust. "I am done. Victoria," he said, "I am done lying for you. I am done stealing for you. And I am done being afraid of you." He turned away from her. He saw me standing 10 feet away. He hesitated, looking like he wanted to come over, wanted to hug me, but he knew he lost that right a long time ago. He gave me a small, sad nod, a nod that said, "I am sorry." And then he walked away, heading down the long marble hallway toward the exit, leaving Victoria standing alone, surrounded by the ruins of the life she had tried to steal. I watched him go. I didn't run after him. I didn't call out. But as I watched his retreating back, I felt a weight lift off my chest. He hadn't chosen me to save the money. He had chosen me to save his soul. And as I looked at Victoria, now standing alone and shivering in the corridor, I knew the war was over. She had lost her money. She had lost her husband. And in a few minutes, when we went back inside, she was going to lose her freedom. The closing arguments began under a sky that had turned a bruising shade of purple outside the courtroom windows. Inside, the air was stale, recycled, and heavy with the scent of desperation. Colin Drake stood up for the defense. He looked tired. His expensive suit seemed to hang a little looser on his frame than it had at the start of the trial. He knew, just as everyone in the room knew, that the smart mirror video had been a fatal blow, but he was a lawyer, and he had a job to do, even if that job was trying to patch a sinking ship with tissue paper. He walked to the jury box, resting his hands on the railing. He spoke softly, trying to evoke an intimacy that felt unearned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have seen videos, we have seen spreadsheets, but let us not forget the human element. Arthur Marlowe was a lonely man. Victoria Hale Marlowe was the woman who drove him to the doctor. She was the woman who ensured he was fed. Yes, emotions ran high. Yes, mistakes were made. But does a moment of family conflict negate 5 years of care?" He pointed to Victoria, who was looking down at her lap, trying to summon one last tear. "We are asking you to look past the cold, hard data of the plaintiff." Drake continued, "We are asking you to recognize that a family is messy. Arthur changed his will not because of fraud, but because he was heartbroken by the distance of his granddaughter. Do not strip a widow of her home because of a technicality." He sat down. It was a weak ending to a weak case. Gabe Reddick stood up. He didn't walk to the jury box. He walked to the center of the room and stood there, solid and immovable as a mountain. He didn't use flowery language. He didn't whisper. He spoke with the precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. "We are not here because of a family conflict," Gabe said. "We are not here because of a messy relationship. We are here because of a pattern." He held up the USB drive one last time. "We have shown you the timeline. We have shown you the login at 2 a.m. We have shown you the voice impersonation. And we have shown you the violence." Gabe turned to look at Victoria. "The defense wants you to believe Arthur Marlowe was heartbroken. He was. But he was not heartbroken because his granddaughter was distant. He was heartbroken because he realized that the people living in his house, eating his food, and smiling at his table were waiting for him to die." Gabe turned back to the jury, his voice dropping an octave, resonating off the wood paneling. "Arthur Marlowe did not die because he lacked money. He almost died because he was surrounded by people who viewed him not as a father, not as a friend, but as an automated teller machine. The difference between a family and a bank is that a family protects you. A bank is just a place you go to make a withdrawal. And for 5 years, Victoria Hale Marlowe has been making withdrawals." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Do not let her make one final withdrawal today." Judge Vance charged the jury. They filed out. Usually, in cases this complex, deliberations can take days. We prepared to go home. I started packing my briefcase, my hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. But they didn't take days. They didn't even take an hour. 45 minutes later, the bailiff opened the door. "The jury has reached a verdict." I sat down. My father, Daniel, was sitting 3 rows back. I could feel his eyes on the back of my neck, burning. Victoria was staring straight ahead, her jaw set so tight I thought her teeth might shatter. The foreman stood up. He was a middle-aged man who worked in construction. He didn't look at Victoria. "In the matter of the estate of Arthur Marlowe, regarding the validity of the will dated November 1st, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Quinn Marlowe." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. "Regarding the countersuit of undue influence and fraud brought by Victoria Hale Marlowe, we find in favor of the defendant, Quinn Marlowe." Victoria let out a sharp, strangled sob. "And," the foreman continued, glancing at a piece of paper, "regarding the petition to invalidate the transfer of the property at 442 Skyline Drive, we find that the property belongs solely to the estate and thus to the sole beneficiary, Quinn Marlowe." Judge Vance nodded. He looked at the defense table. "Furthermore," the judge said, his voice like iron, "given the evidence presented regarding the unauthorized access of banking systems, identity theft via telecommunications, and the video evidence of physical assault, I am referring this entire case file to the district attorney's office for immediate review." Victoria stood up. "You can't do this," she screamed. "Mrs. Hale Marlowe, sit down." "It is rigged," she yelled, turning to the cameras in the back of the room. "The whole system is rigged. You hate women. You hate that I was smart enough to manage his money." This time, the bailiffs didn't wait. They moved in, flanked her, and escorted her out of the courtroom while she was still shouting about injustice. But nobody was listening. The reporters weren't writing down her quotes. They were looking at me. I walked out of the courthouse into a blinding flash of camera bulbs. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and black, reflecting the neon lights of the city. A forest of microphones was thrust into my face. "Quinn! Quinn! How do you feel? Are you going to move into the mansion? What do you have to say to your stepmother?" I stopped. I looked at the cameras. I thought about the PR campaign Victoria had run against me. I thought about the neighbors who had turned their backs. I stepped up to the microphones. My grandfather, Arthur Marlowe, taught me a lot about value. I said, my voice steady. He taught me that you can put a price on a house, you can put a price on a stock, but you cannot put a price on loyalty. I looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. Victoria Hale Marlowe thought that if she controlled the narrative, she could control the truth. She thought that a $3 million mansion was a prize to be won, but today, the jury confirmed what my grandfather knew in his final days. Money can replace a house, it can replace a car, but it cannot replace a human being. Today, I just kept my promise to him. I turned to leave, but a hand touched my shoulder. I flinched, instinctively stepping back. It was my father. Daniel looked older than his 55 years. His face was gray, lined with the wreckage of his choices. He wasn't wearing his wedding ring anymore. "Quinn," he said. His voice was rough. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. "I saw the video," he whispered. "The mirror video. I saw it in court, but I really saw it. I saw myself standing there, doing nothing." He wiped a hand across his mouth. "I am sorry about the money. Quinn, I am sorry about the gambling, but mostly, I am sorry that when you were on the floor, I didn't pick you up. I was so afraid of losing the lifestyle that I lost my daughter instead." He looked at me with a desperate hope. "I don't expect you to fix it," he said, "but I wanted you to know I am going to get help, for the gambling, for everything." I looked at this man, this stranger who shared my DNA. I felt a pang of sadness, sharp and deep, but it wasn't the crippling pain I had felt months ago. It was a distant ache, like a scar that had finally healed over. "I appreciate that, Dad," I said softly. "Can we—" He hesitated. "Can we try again? Maybe dinner, sometime?" I shook my head slowly. "I forgive you, Dad," I said, "and I mean that. I forgive you because holding on to the anger is just letting her win again. But forgiveness isn't a key. It doesn't open the door back into my life." I stepped back. "You need to get better for yourself, not for me. Because right now, I can't look at you without seeing the man who watched me bleed and looked away." I walked away then. I walked to my car, leaving him standing on the sidewalk, a lonely figure against the massive stone pillars of justice. The next morning, I went to the office of Henderson and Clark. Mr. Henderson was waiting for me. On his desk sat a thick envelope and a set of heavy iron keys. The keys to the mansion. "Congratulations. Quinn," he said, "the deed is officially in your name. The eviction notice for Victoria was served this morning. She has 24 hours to vacate." I looked at the keys. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cold. "There is one more thing," Mr. Henderson said. He opened a safe behind his desk and pulled out a sealed letter. "Arthur left this for you. He gave me strict instructions. It was only to be given to you if you won the trial." I took the envelope. My name was written on the front in Arthur's shaky handwriting. I opened it. "My dearest Quinn, if you are reading this, it means you did it. It means you beat them. I never doubted you would. I know you, my dear. I know you are looking at that house right now and hating it. You are looking at it and seeing a crime scene. You are seeing the greed that poisoned our family. Victoria thinks that house is the ultimate symbol of power. She thinks owning it means she matters. That is why I left it to you. Not so you would live in it, but so you could decide what it truly means." If you win, Quinn, I have one last request. Do not live there. Do not let the ghosts of their greed haunt you. Use the house to be the one thing we never were for you. A shield. Turn it into the final thing we let them take from us. Make it the voice of the victim. Love, Grandpa. I lowered the letter. I looked at Mr. Henderson. I don't want to move in, I said. I assumed as much, he replied. We can list it. The market is good. You could get $3.2 million for it. No, I said, I don't want to just sell it. I picked up the keys. The metal was cold in my hand. I want to liquidate the assets. I want to sell the furniture, the art, the wine collection, everything Victoria bought to make herself feel important. And I want to use the proceeds, along with the sale of the house, to start a foundation. Mr. Henderson raised an eyebrow. What kind of foundation? The Arthur Marlowe Foundation. I said, its purpose will be to provide legal and financial aid to the elderly who are victims of financial abuse by their own families. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. I want that house to be a shelter. I said, I want to lease it for $1 a year to an organization that provides emergency housing for seniors who have been evicted by their children. Mr. Henderson smiled. It was a genuine smile. Arthur would have loved that, he said. It is the ultimate revenge, isn't it? Turning her palace of greed into a sanctuary for the people she tried to prey upon. Exactly, I said. 6 months later, I stood in front of the iron gates of 442 Skyline Drive. The for sale sign was gone. In its place was a small, modest plaque. The Marlowe Center for Elder Advocacy. The driveway wasn't filled with luxury cars anymore. It was filled with a van from a local charity. The windows were open, letting in the fresh air off the lake, chasing away the stale smell of expensive perfume and secrets. I held the keys in my hand one last time. Victoria was awaiting trial. The district attorney had charged her with 3 counts of fraud, 2 counts of identity theft, and 1 count of assault. My father was in a rehab facility in Arizona, working off his debts by managing the grounds. I was back at the bureau. I had my badge back. I had my gun back. But I wasn't just an investigator anymore. I walked up the driveway. A woman was standing there. She was the director of the shelter. Ms. Marlowe, she said, smiling, we are ready for the intake. We have 3 residents arriving today. All of them were coerced into signing over their deeds. I dropped the keys into her hand. It is all yours, I said. Keep the lights on. I walked back to my car. I didn't look back. The house wasn't my cage anymore. It wasn't my burden. It was just a building doing some good in the world. I drove to the courthouse, not to the defendant's entrance, but to the employee entrance. I walked through security, flashing my badge. I walked down the hallway, past courtroom 4B, where I had almost lost everything. I stopped at the door. I touched the cold wood handle. I closed my eyes and I could hear it, the echo of that morning, the sound of my grandfather's cane tapping on the marble floor, the sound of his voice, cutting through the lies. Tell me, last night, at 2 a.m, who logged into my bank account? I opened my eyes. That night, they thought the blow in the mansion would scare me into silence. They thought a bruise would make me run. But that very blow, and the question of who accessed the bank at 2 a.m, gave me the only weapon they could not buy. It gave me the truth. And the truth doesn't just set you free. Sometimes, if you use it right, it burns the whole house down so you can build something better from the ashes. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and retribution, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I love hearing from people all over the world, and please, make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that like button so we can get this story out to as many people as possible. Stay safe, and remember, always check the logs.